have a couple of practical issues to highlight. We have no fire drill planned tonight, so if there is a fire alarm, please make your way out of the building in a calm and orderly fashion as guided by staff. People with mobility issues should gather in the foyer. On the left-hand side, you should leave the chamber near the balustrade, where assistance will be provided. The toilets are at the far end of the corridors either side of the chamber. Ladies to the left as you leave, gents to the right. We received apologies from Councillors Davis, Studley, Vaughan Thomas and Young. I should have looked up Councillor Thomas before reading out my announcement. Welcome, good to see you. So I'll just make a few announcements. I guess the civic year's got off to a very varied and interesting start. We've had visits to arts events, including a very thought-provoking piece commissioned by Hospital Rooms, an arts and mental health charity, and it's on show at a newer site with the open venue previously was. There have also been concerts, and the All Women's Orchestra and Choir were simply amazing, and they were fundraising for Cancer Research UK. The Sheriff and I also welcomed Their Highnesses, the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester to Norwich as part of their visit to see the HMS Gloucester exhibition at the castle. This week is Norwich Refugee Week, and on Sunday I had the pleasure of attending the launch event at the football club. The programme is incredibly varied, and I would like to encourage members to attend as many events as you possibly can. During the last few days I've also attended the 600th Norwich Park Run, and it was great to see current and former councillors there taking part. The Eton Parish's garden party, Armed Forces flag raising, the Open Doors Healthy, Happy, Safe event, and the launch of the Benjamin Foundation's 2023 sleep out. But perhaps the most significant event was a whistle-stop visit to Rouen last week, where on Friday morning the Mayor of Rouen and I signed a new memorandum of understanding between our cities, building on the strong relationships we've had since 1959. I took the opportunity to offer our unwavering support to their application to be European City of Culture, or Capital of Culture, in 2028. Now to some sadder news. I'd like to invite Councillor Sonnard to say a few words about the death of Sarah Grenville, a former City Councillor who I know was known to many in the Chamber and well respected by all of us, and we definitely mourn her loss. So Councillor Sonnard.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We learned last week of the sad death of former councillor and valued friend and colleague Sarah Grenville. Sarah always worked hard for constituents in University Ward, and also she worked in other wards where she wasn't a councillor but needed her help, for example Thorpe Hamlet, which is quite rare for councillors to do that. She also was very committed to the campaign to elect Clive Lewis, and she worked enormously hard for Clive, and I know he greatly appreciated her commitment and input. Sarah learned at Christmas that she had terminal cancer. At the time she was living away from Norwich in Sheffield with her two daughters. Now being in Sheffield made it easier also for her to travel to see her son who lives in Bristol, and his doctor, so he made sure she got the best possible treatment. Sarah was admitted to a hospice before the end, and apparently her son has said she was treated very well there. In her last Christmas message, I understand that she was very positive, and she would send a very long Christmas message every year to friends and family. Apparently she was very positive despite the cancer diagnosis and also ongoing rheumatoid arthritis, which meant that she was in a great deal of pain. But she said she was living life to the full and trying to go for a walk every day despite vertigo brought on by her medication. So it was a very tough situation for her. But Sarah was always very strong. She would always make her point of view known, as I know, and I'm sure many of my colleagues know. And I know that she will be sadly missed as a colleague and also as a friend.
Thank you, Councillor Sonnard, for those words. We'll now have a minute's silence in memory of 7. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest to make on any items on the agenda? Councillor Vaughan Thomas.
Thank you, Lord. Other interest on 8D and 8E. Sorry,
So, other interest on 8D and 8E?
yes.
As a director, yes. Councillor Stoddart, your hand is up as well.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I have a declaration of interest, and I can't remember the number, but on the motion about Swift boxes, because I'm a director of Line Homes, and although I am leaving the board, I think technically my name is still on the register of directors at Companies House.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor Fulton, Councillor.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I also have a declaration of interest, other interest, on 8D and E as the Director of NCSL.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest? Councillor Galvin.
Declaration of interest on 8, I'm not sure which one it is, but as a private family.
Thank you. I think that's it for declarations. Thank you. So we now move on to questions from the public. The first question, and we've received 3 public questions today. The first is from Mr. Nick O'Brien. Mr. O'Brien, would you ask your question, please?
Thank you very much. My question is about Norwich Pride. So next month, on the 29th of July, the annual Norwich Pride event will take place in the city and hopefully be enjoyed by thousands of people. This will take place, though, against a national and international political agenda of increasing hostility towards LGBT+ rights, which causes alarm to all decent citizens in the city. Given the change of leadership in the City Council, can the new leader, and the question is aimed at the leader, reaffirm his support for Norwich Pride on behalf of the City Council and comment on whether he will give his personal support to those working to protect and enhance our city's reputation as being one that always welcomes and celebrates diversity and equality?
Thank you for your question. Councillor Stoddart, would you please give your reply?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Nick, for your question. As a former chair of Norwich Pride and as someone who's held voluntary leadership positions in the LGBT+ communities in North and Suffolk for almost 40 years, it's very easy for me to confirm my support for it. And I'm looking forward to taking part in this year's event on the 29th of July, not least as it will be the first year that this council itself will be represented at Pride through its own group taking part in the march. The council supports the annual event in a wide range of ways by enabling road closures, providing safety advice and event logistics support, staffing and opening up City Hall as an event control centre, allowing access to the balcony to start the march, flying the Pride flag and lighting City Hall in Pride colours. We also reduced the hire fees for the use of Chapel Field Gardens and Chantry Car Park. We are proud of our LGBT+ community and celebrate with them. And in that vein, I was also very pleased to attend the second Trans Pride on Saturday at Eden Park. It was a joyous occasion with some great entertainment. I know several colleagues within the room were also there. However, this is a challenging time for the LGBT+ community, not least because of the increasing hostility towards trans people. Last year we passed a motion in this chamber affirming the City Council's belief that trans rights are human rights and affirming the legal rights of all protected groups under the 2010 Equality Act. This council believes all council services must be equipped to welcome and provide appropriate service and good customer care to suit transgender and non-binary people. I'd also like to take this opportunity to restate the policy of Norwich Labour Party, relevant because this is a Labour-controlled council, which was passed a full 7 years ago in support of trans rights. This policy states that Norwich Labour Party stands united against discrimination of any kind and aims to create a just society. It believes that trans men are men and trans women are women and non-binary people are non-binary. And it further states that we stand opposed to transphobic discrimination. Trans rights are human rights. We stand with our trans friends against transphobia of all kinds. As I say, this has been Norwich Labour Party policy since 2016 and they remain 100% committed to it. I'm proud that Norwich has a long history of being a radical, innovative city, rich in cultural and ethnic diversity, which I and the council both celebrate and promote. I want the city to be a fair, welcoming, safe, accessible and inclusive place for everyone. As a council, we work closely with partners and communities as part of our continued commitment to tackling inequality and promoting diversity to make Norwich the best it can be for everyone, recognising that different people and communities have different needs. So it's a city where everyone feels they belong, is respected, has a voice and has a chance to succeed and thrive. And finally, if it's not too soon, may I wish everyone a happy Pride.
Thank you, Councillor Stannard. Mr O'Brien, you're allowed one supplementary question. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes. So just briefly, I noted at the beginning of the comment about this being Refugee Week. I think in Norwich Pride, we see our pride as being an intersectional pride. And Norwich has always been a city that welcomes everybody and has the progressive roots that you talked about, from the strangers to Ukrainian refugees that came last year. So I wanted to ask as my supplementary question, what for you is the absolute priority of this Cabinet chamber in terms of inclusion moving forward over the next year?
I think there are many challenges, and you're right, Norwich has traditionally been a welcoming city and it's welcomed strangers. But I think there are a couple of areas that really stand out for me in terms of the need for greater understanding and greater support. One is the trans community, quite clearly under threat at the moment, very clearly. And also the community of refugees and asylum seekers, who, again, I know there's a demonstration coming up. It's going to be a stain on the city when that happens, outside one of the hotels which is used to house asylum seekers. It could be regarded as shaming the city, except we know that most of the demonstrators will come from outside, they won't be Norwich people. But those are the two absolute priority areas, because I think those are the two areas of greatest need at the moment in these very difficult political times.
Thank you. Second question is from Ms Jane Overhill. Ms Overhill, would you please ask your question?
Thank you. Living in Newport Hamlet, presence of the world in SOS cost to ensure those who run into difficulties while enjoying the Norwich maritime economy return safe to their homes has been acknowledged for many years. News that the service could be cut due to pressures on the NHS budgets has worried residents who live in East Wales Road, who have, if they encounter a person in distress, been able to assist them directly to the SOS bus service. Can we comment on whether this council will support the campaign to save this important service and advocate for its continuation?
Thank you. Councillor Stannard, please give your reply.
And thank you very much for your question. So the SOS bus in Norwich City Centre has for 20 years been a vital source of assistance for people using the nighttime economy at weekends. We've come to take for granted the excellent work it does, made all the more remarkable by the fact that most of those working on the bus are volunteers. For those who aren't familiar with the work of the bus, Their own website states that the service provides assistance to anyone in Norwich City Centre on Friday and Saturday nights whose well-being is threatened by illness or injury, emotional distress or other vulnerability. When large groups of people congregate, there will always be people who get separated from their friends, lose their wallet or purse, have no charge in their phone, miss their bus or train home, or become injured in some way. And there are plenty of stories illustrating examples of that. And all those things make them incredibly vulnerable. The SOS bus is a safe haven for people in such vulnerable circumstances. In the middle of the night and often a long way from home, the volunteers are supported by a paramedic and a first aider. I went to see it some years ago when I was a portfolio holder and was very impressed by the quality of the service and the dedication and commitment of the staff and volunteers. In case anyone doubts the need or importance of the service, I would remind them of the circumstances that led up to it being set up. There were in the 1990s several deaths of young people in and around the nighttime economy. The one I remember most clearly, and this is my recollection, was a young man aged about 18 who'd been out with his friends celebrating the end of their exams. This young man was refused entry to a nightclub because, as I recall, he wasn't wearing the right shoes. Unfortunately, his group had already got into the club, and so none of them knew what had happened or where he was. So he was left alone and vulnerable in Norwich in the small hours, separated from his friends and with time to waste. I don't know exactly what happened next, but it seems he walked down to the river, where he was found drowned some hours later. Following this tragedy, Norwich realised that something had to be done to protect young people like him, and the SOS bus was born. It was unique in this country at the time, and has since been copied by other towns and cities. The bus also provides a benefit for the NHS of helping prevent unnecessary A&E visits and ambulance call-outs, both of which are expensive and add pressure to already stretched health services. And it also frees up police officers' time. It is part funded by Norfolk County Council's Public Health and the Norfolk and Waveney Integrated Care Board. The NHS is considering ending its funding in March. Recently, the local NHS also considered closing our much-loved walking centre. We all know that the NHS is under enormous financial pressure following 14 years of Tory austerity and then having to respond to a global pandemic when it was already struggling from a lack of funds and staff shortages. My concern is that this wanton neglect of our superb NHS by the heartless Tories is a real reason why much-loved and moreover vital local services, which we all take for granted, are being considered for closure. It's all about money, but in reality, both these services actually save the NHS money. Overwhelming public and political pressure saved our walking centre, and the same has happened with the SOS bus. Therefore, I'm very pleased to confirm that this council will support the campaign to save the SOS bus and will advocate for its continuation.
So, you're allowed one supplementary question. Do you have a supplementary question? Thank you. The third question is from Mr. Jason Bill. Mr. Bill, would you please ask your question?
How does the council ensure progress within its competitive tendering and compliance in relevant principles of public life?
Councillor Kendrick, would you please give your reply?
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Bill, for asking your questions. As I understand, you've been made aware of the Council's constitution, which includes our procurement rules. The purpose of which is not just to obtain value for money, as they state, to ensure propriety, transparency and equality when buying goods and services. These rules must be followed when the Council undertakes its purchasing activities. They set out, for example, that there must be segregation of duties within the purchasing process to minimise the risk of error and fraud and other inappropriate activities. All council staff are bound by a code of conduct, as are all councillors, which require them to declare such conflicts and take appropriate action to manage the risk of conflict. If you want to know further details, there is extensive information on the procurement section of our website, which you are very welcome to review.
Mr. Bill, you're allowed one supplementary question. Do you have a supplementary question?
Indeed, I do. Some years back, I met councillors from the Estates Department, and they asked me what I could do for them. I responded prosaically, but as an architect, I could say creative, social, sustainable housing is a valuable use in society for the people of Norwich. A few weeks later, their colleague unlawfully defended me in the council meeting, housing meeting. When the council refused to correct that lie, the council was sued. A high five-figure sum was paid in damages. Regrettably, the council, including the previous CEO, immediately breached the undertakings of that Royal Court of Justice order, and further public money was paid in damages. More recently, I submitted a tender as an architect. The same council officer that unlawfully defamed me participated in assessing the tender. The Nolan principles would require them to be open, honest, and act with integrity. They did not declare their past unlawful actions. If previous motivations are not simply corrupt, they certainly fall short of the standards required by the several principles of public life. Just as I would say...
Mr. Bill, you have 1 minute to ask your supplementary question. That time is out.
Yes, another time. So,
I don't think you've got to a question yet.
So the behaviour of that council officer not declaring that they had acted unlawfully in the past...
Mr. Bill, I'm being informed that there is a court order that prohibits you from raising the issue.
No, that's not the case. There's a court order that binds you yourselves to not breach that court order.
You've had 1 minute, you haven't got to a question yet.
I have asked you, does it comply with the standards of the Nolan principles that the council officer failed to declare that they had acted unlawfully against it? I don't believe it does.
Councillor Kenwick, do you wish to attempt to reply?
In my opinion,
take it offline.
In my opinion, this is not the suitable place to discuss these issues. If you have concerns, I would ask you to contact the monitoring officer in the proper process.
Thank you. Petitions. There will be no petitions received for this meeting. Minutes. I call on Councillor Stannard in the minutes of the meetings held on the 14th of March 2023, 28th of April 2023 and the 23rd of May 2023.
Formally moved, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Call upon Councillor Galvin to second the minutes.
Seconded.
We will now move to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate. That is unanimous. Thank you. We now move on to questions to Cabinet members. There are 22 questions from members of the Council to Cabinet members, of which notice has been given in accordance with the provisions of Part 3 of the Constitution. A copy will be available on the Council's website. Members who have asked questions are permitted to put a supplementary question to the Cabinet member. Question 1, Councillor Maguire, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, my Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Stannard, for your reply, which is helpful. Now, having lived in this city for decades, I'm acutely aware of how Norwich has changed from light industrial to more of a retail offer, to the service industry has become dominant and rival. The success of this council, working with partners to support the techniques and national trend is impressive. Will you agree, however, that we need radically to transform business rates? And if so, how should this be done?
Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I do agree, and what we need is central government which is willing to do that, which we don't have at the moment. But I can assure you that Labour is committed to transforming business rates to meet the needs of the modern economy. We've called for an immediate cut for small firms, which the government has failed to do, and for firms to be given immediately given any discount they're owed due to the current vehicle revaluation. The government backed down on this second measure in the autumn after pressure from Labour. Labour is concerned that the current revaluation of business rates implemented as of April 2023 will hit smaller high street stores particularly, already struggling post-pandemic and facing a difficult winter of higher energy bills. Because the Tory government have turned their back on this fundamental reform, we also call for short-term support for an increase in the threshold for small business rates relief. That's from a current threshold of £15,000 to £25,000 to give SMEs a discount on their business rates for 2023-2024. Estimates suggest that this will save our high street more than £1 billion in business rate reductions that the government would otherwise withhold. So you can see that we do have comprehensive plans, and there's more I could talk about in terms of our plans to transform business rates in order to address the very real problems you've raised.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Sanders, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, Lord Mayor, I do, and thank you very, very much. Thank you, Councillor Kendrick, for your reply. It's a national disgrace that voters were turned away from polling stations in Norwich, including in my ward, due to the impact of this national Tory government legislation. Of 2 million people able to apply for a free certificate, only around 85,000 did, leaving some 1.9 million unable to exercise their democratic right. I'm pleased that the scrutiny committee is now examining this issue and how best our council can respond to the impact of this pernicious and deeply undemocratic piece of legislation. Can the Cabinet member confirm that this council will consider carefully and implement, if and wherever possible, any recommendation which protects our citizens' right to vote? Thank you.
Councillor Henry.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sands. Very much appreciate the supplementary question. I'm giving you my full assurance that this the Cabinet and the Council will take on board what the Scrutiny Committee recommend on July the 20th, and God willing, I hope to be in attendance to that meeting. I think it's a very important meeting, and I think it's one that we can all look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Packer, question 3. Do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Jones, for your reply. Representing a ward which contains a number of leaseholders, I'm particularly aware of the power imbalance and the need for the current system, which has been referred to rightly as feudal, to be abolished. Will you agree that the Tory government has significantly missed an opportunity to do this, but also support the Cooperative Party campaign to bring in a new common freehold which would better protect constituents like mine?
Councillor Jones, would you like to reply?
Thank you for the supplementary. As a member of the Cooperative Party, I'm fascinated by the party's proposals around the idea of common freehold. Given that leaseholders have been consistently found by the government who promised them reforms and unsurprisingly failed to deliver on those, we've got many leaseholders left in limbo due to this uncertainty as to government plans. So I believe all options should be open to consideration by a future government. Given the idea of common hold has been used internationally, I wonder if the lack of desirability of it for developers is for the reason it's been left on the back burner in the UK, resulting in the government rolling back on previous commitments to introduce it by default in the future. So I think everything should be on the table. I look forward to a change in government where these things can be explored more fully.
I'll move to question 4. Councillor Susan, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, Lord Mayor, I do, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Stoddart, for your reply. The ward I represent contains some of the highest poverty rates in Norwich, and its citizens need strong, well-funded public services which extend opportunity and security for people. So when it is revealed that between 2010 and now, the 10% of local authorities with the highest level of deprivation, including Norwich, face funding cuts averaging 28%, while the 10% of councils with the lowest levels of deprivation face funding cuts averaging 10.1%. This frankly horrifies me. Will you commit to work closely with the Local Government Association and its new Labour leadership to make the strongest case possible for government councils like Norwich to receive the resources it needs? Thank you.
Councillor Stoddart, would you like to give a reply, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Local government has lost £15 billion since 2010, so communities up and down the country are desperate for investment. Instead of offering local authorities the funding desperately needed to keep their services afloat, the Tory government have placed more burdens on councils by forcing them to make the decision to raise council tax further. Council tax rises will put heavy pressures on households already struggling with the cost of living crisis. From the energy price cap going up, soaring food costs and fuel prices hitting another record high, the list of price rises under this government goes on and on. Labour will empower our towns, cities and regions to build strong local economies that support strong public services. When in government, we will consult closely on recent proposals in Gordon Brown's Commission on the Future of Britain on giving local leaders more financial autonomy and longer-term funding settlements, and we will transfer more powers over skills, transport and planning to local leaders.
Question 5. Councillor Fulton McAllister, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor. So first of all, thank you, Councillor Jones, for your detailed answer. I'd like to ask that with the significant issues that we have in University Ward, I'm not going to lecture you on them, you know them pretty well, but the poor quality housing that we have for the benefit of other councillors who may not know, the way that landlords are constantly squeezing extra bodies into rooms which will not necessarily take them. Could you comment on how the Renters Reform Bill will actually impact on our residents, and if you think there are any areas where it should go further?
Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Thank you for the supplementary, and you know, it's a topic that's very close to my heart. Yes, whilst I welcome any legislation that is taking any steps realistically to protect the rights of private renters, I do feel this bill does fall short from a position that I think any politician who's truly committed to safe and secure housing would want it to be at. I think we've got a couple of big issues. There's in reality in the bill the scope for Section 21 evictions done by the back door, with limited disincentives of retaliatory evictions when people raise concerns. And you know, that is that right to expect safe and secure housing. Alongside that, we've got the only 3-month ban on reletting when the landlord evicts, with the idea that they're going to sell the property. It's not much incentive to evict people, put up the rent, or evict in a retaliatory manner. So I would support the calls for generation rent to extend this to a year. I'm not celebrating this bill because it's taken so long to get here. And in the meantime, since 2019, when it was first put forward, we're talking about 65,000 households that have already been made homeless nationally by so-called no-fault evictions. And I believe that sadly there will be tens of thousands more by the time we ever get to a bill of any form gaining any assent. And each one of those is far too many. I think realistically there are ways that we can safeguard private renters more. And I think that one of that is something that we're very committed to as a local authority. There may not be a national law for this at the moment, but we are committed to the expansion of licensing properties. At the moment we have a statutory scheme that's covering about 1,000 properties, but we are committed to extending that initially, and that will include all houses, the multiple occupancy, so that's where you've got unrelated occupants. With an ambition to ultimately license every private rented property in the city. I think realistically that is the only way we get the standards we need in private accommodation, because I don't think incentives, it has to be imposed realistically. And this is a fight that's gone on far too long. We go from the days of Whittard, the early Labour councillor in the city, who was raising the rights of private renters in his campaign material. You know, we're talking far too long, and we're still talking about how we protect private renters. So without will from central government, we on a city level will continue to move forward with action on this. Thank you.
Question 6, Councillor Kidman, do you have a supplementary question?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 7, Councillor Huntley, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor, I do. The high quality homes we built on the former King's Arms site are much appreciated by the residents, not least for the standard of energy efficiency to which they are constructed. Would the Cabinet member be able to comment at this stage on such features of the social housing being proposed for the Mark Cross Depot site, please?
Councillor Jones, would you give your reply, please?
Thank you for the supplementary, and I'd say this is one of many exciting new parts of my portfolio. Whilst I can't go far into design specifics at present, I can reassure that we continue to have a strong commitment to high quality housing with our first approach, and believe that introduction of energy generation scheme will have a significant positive impact on the lives of future tenants. You know, we should be moving towards, and I believe we are, where our tenants won't be in these new builds thinking about whether they have to choose between heating and eating. You know, that we can make that radical change as landlords, but it shouldn't be radical, but it is. You know, we're not only building houses, we'll be building homes. I think that's a really important ambition.
Thank you. Councillor Ailes, Question 8, Councillor Princely, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Oliver. In my day job, I work as a consultant surgeon at the hospital, and I know the difference investments such as this new change-in-place toilet will have upon people who cannot easily access public amenities without such adaptations. Given the strong record of this council in securing new investment to deliver change-in-places toilets in the city, can you describe in more detail the benefits which they offer and assure me that work to hopefully deliver more of these will continue to be pursued by this council?
Councillor Oliver, would you give me a reply, please?
Thank you, Bill Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Prince, for my words. Yes, so it's all about inclusion and everybody being able to access the city and what it has to offer. Standard accessible is only accommodate a standard-sized wheelchair, and of course people have additional needs to that, for example, motorised wheelchairs and other disabilities that prevent them from spending time in the city, needing to go home, for example, after a couple of hours because there aren't facilities there. If you look on the changingplaces.org website, you'll see that there's 1,861 changing places facilities over the country, and plenty in Norwich. There'll be one opening at Castle when that reopens, and more to come. I think with regard to funding, we worked in partnership with the Forum to secure the funding for this. I'm particularly proud of it. And I think in the context of the lack of money coming from central government to local government, it's particularly important that we look at creative solutions so we don't leave people behind when we're trying to make life better for each citizen.
Question 9, Councillor Padder, do you have a supplementary question?
No supplementary from me, thank you, Lord.
Thank you. Question 10, Councillor Driver, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, Lord Mayor. Can I thank Councillor Giles for the answer? It's fantastic to see this investment in affordable sport in Leighton and so partners. Could the Cabinet member comment on how the quality of the previous upgraded courts are being maintained to a great standard?
Councillor Giles, would you give your reply, please?
Thank you, Councillor Driver. I'm pleased to highlight that as per our budget passed in February, we are investing £122,000 this financial year in resurfacing courts in both Eton and Waterloo to ensure all our tennis sports remain to the high standard our residents deserve.
Question 11, Councillor Peake, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Starlight. It seems to be that most purchase the owner of your Leicester site would have likely valid on forward an application. Depends on the chance of much needed regeneration be considered. Given that Norwich needs stairs and new homes, and particularly social housing, we will agree that they will forward the planning clause to remove the problem land banking is vital if we want to take the type of action to tackle national and local housing crisis.
Councillor Starlight, give your reply, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. You're right, the city is blighted by sites which are effectively being land banked, brownfield sites, which desperately need development and have been in that way for some time. And although we are beginning to have success, we need more powers. We can be more successful. An incoming Labour government has plans to give local officials sweeping new powers to buy land cheaply and develop on it as part of a new pro-building agenda. If elected next year, we will pass a law to allow local government authorities in England the power to buy up land at a fraction of the potential cost if they plan to build it. The new law will allow officials to buy land under compulsory purchase orders without having to factor in a hope value. Now that's a massive price premium granted to any land on which developers hope to secure planning permission. Keir Starmer is willing to risk the wrath of existing land and property owners in this attempt to jumpstart new building across the country. I'm very proud of that. Labour wants to rebalance the power between landowners and local communities. The principle is to tilt the balance of power, which is now tilted towards landowners and not communities. And in so doing, we will be able to force the development of brownfield land bank sites to be land banked by greedy owners for many, many years, which blight the city, and I'm very much looking forward to the day when we can do that.
Thank you. Before we get on to the next question, can I just give a quick reminder to some members? Some of the microphones in here aren't as good as others in picking up your voices, so you can speak as close to the microphone as you possibly can. We've got lots of fans on it here this evening to try and do something about the temperature, so just so that everyone can hear what you're saying, that would be great. Thank you. Question 12, Councillor Lubbock, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Lord Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Giles, for your response. There has indeed been problems, the details of which have been directed to me, if not to the Council. Problems of cars parking on grass verges, sometimes to abreast, which dangerously obscures the driver's view when exiting a sheltered housing scheme. No appropriate action has been taken, despite a councillor email inquiring the action to be taken. Would it not be a good idea to liaise with local councillors? Councillors who are so much more accessible to residents than the very poor councillor telephone system.
Thank you,
Giles, could you give your reply?
Thank you, Councillor Lubbock. If you could forward me the concerns you have and what you've heard from residents, please do let me know. Obviously, we've got a couple of our Labour group councillors who live in that area and join the park and keep you updated on how things are going. But I'm happy to liaise.
Thank you. Question 13, Councillor Osborne, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Mayor, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say I actually wanted my question to go to the leader of the council to illustrate council's saying starting this, but I'm happy to vote for the Councillor Giles. Thank you to you, staff who've come, members who've come this evening. Thank you to all councillors who showed support outside before this meeting started. I understand, talking to the UCU members, that at City College, which has lost its living wage status now, which is a real shame considering that it was one of the original founding members of the city, of the living wage city group. It would actually be possible to pay the lowest paid workers the living wage at half the level of the principal salary. That's how much they could save from that. I want to ask Councillor Giles, yes or no, do you support the strikes?
Before I bring in the Councillor to respond, I'm just ever so slightly confused because my running order here suggests that Councillor Stannard should be providing the reply to this item.
No.
Yes, that's right.
So Councillor Giles has the lead for living wage, which used to be with the lead, it's now in his portfolio.
Right. Thank you for that. Over to you then, Councillor Giles.
Thank you. Yes, we support the right of all workers to take strike action to necessitate the campaigns that they're leading. As I've set out in the paper, we have done a lot to support the real living wage in Norwich. We pay accreditation fees for Norwich businesses up to £120, which for small businesses covers their accreditation fees for up to 2 years. Since the start of the Norwich Real Living Wage strategy, which our Financial Inclusion Officer drew up, the number of living wage employees in Norwich has increased to 71. The amount of staff receiving the real living wage in Norwich has increased to 9,399. And that's resulted so far in 1,970 staff having a pay rise up to the real living wage amount. But in answer to your question, yes, I support the right of workers to strike.
Sorry, can I just clarify, do you support this particular strike?
Yes, I support the right of all workers to strike.
Thank you for those two supplementary questions. Question 14, Councillor Price, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Lord Mayor. Congratulations on your appointment. Thank you to the Cabinet Member for the answer. In the tenant engagement, housing management and Safe in Norwich strategy report, which came to Cabinet in March, over half of the respondents made it clear that they don't agree that digital services make speaking to the council easier and quicker. Rather than having just a focus on increasing digital services and forcing more residents towards this option, and at the same time disenfranchising some, would the Cabinet Member listen to the results of this consultation and commit to providing a friendly voice at the end of the phone in good time for residents who rely on this form of communication with Norwich City Council?
Councillor Jones, to reply, please.
Thank you for your supplementary, and yes, I don't believe that digital is the only way to engage. I think it's very important that people have the ability to speak to someone in good time, and that's something it's new to my portfolio area working on this, and I think it's an area of improvement. And I think it's very important that people have the chance to ask questions in whatever form they feel works for them.
Question 15. Councillor Champion, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Giles, for your well-crafted response to my question, which, on the face of it, does, says a lot of very fine words. What I would really like to do is reiterate my original question, which was, will the Cabinet Member agree to at least create an exclusion area around veteran trees? My concern is that the compression of the root systems through these heavy vehicles will be incredibly damaging. And so I would really like an answer to my original question. Thank you.
Councillor Giles, will you give me a reply, please?
Thanks. I will look into that in more detail and hopefully be able to implement it, and I'll get back to you on that. What I would say is, it's clear that we need to ensure that our events in our parks are distributed across a broad range of parks, both in order to ensure we can sustain ecologically our parks, but also to ensure the events are as accessible as possible for all users.
Thank you. Question 16. Councillor Galvin, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Mayor. I do. Thank you for your answer, Councillor Kendrick. And thank you for acknowledging the steep incline in interims. A survey by the Institute of Interim Managers found that only 11% of interims charge less than £500 a day. 29% of interims charge between £600 and £799 a day. It's worrying, I think, that we are accepting this as a norm that has to happen going forward. Could you let me know what processes HR are putting in place to increase retention to permanent posts without these kind of costs?
Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you very much. I'm a little disappointed that Councillor Galvin makes the classic mistake in terms of value for money. We're just looking at the costs and not actually the value that we retain. Not only within the local government sector, but also within the wider business sector, the use of interims has become much more popular. I feel with regards to both the employee and the employer, the employee, especially for women, it does allow them to have a much more flexible work life during the course of their career. As an employer, we have the advantage of being able to bring in people with particular skills for a particular time. To give just one example, because obviously I do appreciate that I'm limited time. We brought in an absolutely excellent interim housing manager who has helped us through the issues that we did have with compliance, and I think he's proven to be well value for money.
Thank you. Question 17. Councillor Hercules, do you have any supplementary question?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I do. Thank you, Councillor Stunner, for your response. In 2021, Norwich City Council was among the first in the country to pass a motion to restrict advertising of environmentally polluting products and activities, alongside other forms of harmful advertising. There was a real opportunity then to position the Council as a leader on climate action and environmental protection. Now it's 2023, and several other councils have policies in place that restrict harmful advertising, including high carbon advertising. Norwich still has none, and companies can still promote high carbon products and activities on our bus shelters. We still don't have an ethical advertising policy, even though templates now exist that should be fairly easy to adapt and adopt. Could you please clarify the time frame within which the Council will adopt the ethical advertising policy it committed to 2 years ago, and will you commit to meeting with me to clarify the next steps? Thank you.
Councillor Starr, may you give your reply, please?
Yes, thank you for the question. The first thing I say is, in terms of other authorities, it's not a competition. We need to get it right for ourselves here. As my answer has set out, the control and influence we have is complex. It's not straightforward, it's not simple, and it's not direct, as I've demonstrated here. The advertising which takes place not on council land, we can't control at all, for example, as I've stated in the answer. So this is part of an ongoing process. I'd be very happy to meet with you to, however, to request to discuss progress and next steps.
Question 18. Councillor Fox, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Stannard, for the reply, and I'm really pleased that the main council doors are now going to be opened, and that the council is now going to be open over lunch breaks. I just wanted to this is an email that we had from one particular constituent, which says that I called in today re possible visit when a friend from Canada came, a visit to the council chamber, and to pick up leaflets and information. What a barren, soulless and unfriendly area it has become. In previous years, I brought visitors into reception and then called into the chamber and then moved on to another location of interest. With the current environment, feeling, atmosphere, I wouldn't want to bring my visitor into City Hall. So I just wanted to ask, what other measures are the council going to take to make certain that this building is warm and feels like a place that people can and want to come into?
Councillor Starr, you reply, please.
Thank you for your supplementary question. One of the first things I did when I became leader of Labour Group was I spoke to the Chief Executive and asked if the doors should be opened. And that's taken a while to implement because of various changes which were made during lockdown and the need to apply extra staff into the area to welcome people, and also for security reasons. So it's not been easy, but we've managed to get it done, and I'm very pleased that we've managed to get it done. I think the entrance now is much more welcoming, it's very bright, and I don't know if you've been in during the daytime since we opened the doors, but it's now very bright and welcoming. And I think some of the austere atmosphere we described was actually when the doors were shut. When the doors were shut, it was very dark. So I think that's possibly what your resident was reflecting. Jamie, you're confusing me. In terms of additional ways to make the building more attractive, actually we are looking at potentially also having someone in the main foyer to welcome visitors. But I would say actually this building and the grand entrance, it was designed to be welcoming and to make an impact in its own right. It needs very little more to make it welcoming and accessible, because it's absolutely wonderful space. So I think if you see it in the daytime with the light flooding in, you'll see, as I say, that it stands in its own right. There's a great space within the city, and of course we welcome people to come here.
Thank you. Question 19, Councillor Haynes, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, thank you, Lord Mayor. I've been chasing up repairs about this area since I was elected, and I know that the situation has gone on much longer than that. We've had mushrooms growing in communal areas with skip over puddles of water to get to the front door. If you live there, we've had mould, endless mould. Could you tell me why this situation has been allowed to develop for so long, given I've been raising around that for 2 years, and my colleagues are doing so long before that?
Councillor Jones, would you give your reply, please?
afraid I can't comment on the historical side yet, but what I would like to do, Councillor Haynes, is after this meeting, if we could agree a time for me to join you and go and visit the premises, that would be really helpful for me to see firsthand, and then for us to take it forward from there. Happy to discuss it with you after the meeting and arrange a time, if that would be okay. Thank you.
Question 20, Councillor Calvert, do you have a supplementary question, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, I do, yes. Thank you for your response, Councillor Hampton. The council seems to have somewhat struggled with 43 properties needing external planning, and you explained the reasoning a bit in your answer, so thank you for that. The council has allocated 50 million for the next 5 years, £50 million that is, for decarbonisation of housing. What are the measures that the council has put in place to make sure that money, the council has the capacity to efficiently spend that money?
Councillor Hampton, may I give you a reply, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Calvert, for your questions. The specific question you've asked here about the scheme, the answer reflects on the 43 properties is obviously from a grant where there was specific criteria, but slowed it down as that answer outlines. That wasn't necessarily to do with internal capacity, but obviously we do want to be scaling up what we're doing in this area. We will always be reviewing how we do that, capacity, a resource for finance. I can't go into a great level of detail here, but we will be taking this forward through the Environmental Action Programme, which will keep cycling through appropriate scrutiny routes like the climate panel, so more details to come in due course.
Question 21, Councillor Francis, do you have a supplementary question? So could you use your microphone, please?
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if the reason for asking people to put their bins out and take them in at particular times was actually explained to people on the leaflet that goes through people's doors. There are concerns about other users on the pavement, and particularly parents who push chairs into disabled people. And I wondered if that was explained on the leaflet and how you're assessing how effective that is.
Councillor Starr, I think you will reply, please.
Well, I was aware of the rules. I couldn't honestly tell you how I found out what the rules were. So I don't know whether it's on the leaflet, but it probably would be helpful to add it, but I don't know the answer. I'll find out.
Thank you. And finally, question 22, last but not least, Councillor Schmierer, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. And thank you to Councillor Jones for sharing with us the work that the City Council is already doing to tackle loneliness here in Norwich. But to repeat, can we ensure that tackling loneliness becomes one of the metrics by which the success of the Council's housing teams are assessed, please?
Councillor Jones, would you give you a reply, please?
It's something I would definitely look at. I have to say I'm on introduction to various areas of that at the moment. I'd also like to add, obviously we've got stuff around the health and wellbeing work we're doing as well that has elements around suicide prevention, which also links simultaneous with social isolation. There's a lot of stuff going on at a lot of levels, but I think it is a very important issue, and thank you for raising it. In honesty, I can't give you definitive at the moment. I will come back to you on it.
Thank you. We now move on to item 6, gambling statement of principle, gambling policy. Councillor Jones, you've just had time to get your breath, I think. I now call upon Councillor Jones to move item 6.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I will keep this very brief because this has been some great work by the licensing committee, if I'm honest. I'm bringing it forward as a portfolio holder, but I'd like to thank all licensing members for their work on this since they've been out to consultation. So see, as part of over the last couple of years, been reviewing and quite effectively all our licensing regulatory services policies, and this is another one added to that list. It's been out to consultation. I believe there was one response, which was that the person didn't have any comment to make, but I'm glad they engaged in the process of that. I'm not going to go into the detail of the policy, really, because it's a statutory thing, and I'm sure my colleagues have read it. But yes, I hope, the things we do around, yes, they may not sound always fascinating, but regulatory services is something personally I'm fascinated by, but this is about the safety of the city, so as a document it's really important, and gambling as a public health issue is important, so if you haven't had a chance to read it, I would encourage you to take the time to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. And I call upon Councillor Humphrey to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I welcome the statement of principles around gambling policy. This has been scrupulously considered by licensing committee members and balances the provision of gambling opportunities with a prudent understanding of the attendant risks. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. We now invite group spokespersons. Councillor Schmier, would you give your response on behalf of the Greens, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. And this is an area of considerable interest to me, so I have got a few words to say, if I may, about this. It is absolutely important, and I am delighted that this has been brought to full council to be signed off, because a robust gambling statement of principles is an important tool in the arsenal that councils like this one have in limiting the proliferation of unsuitable gambling establishments, whether that be adult gaming centres, whether that be casinos or betting shops, etc. And again, to reiterate what others have already said before me, I'm delighted and thankful for the work and the efforts of both council officers in drafting this and the licensing team who went through this. For those members who aren't on licensing and who are perhaps unaware of the objectives of licensing set out in the gambling legislation of 2005, they are basically threefold. One is preventing gambling from being a source of crime and disorder, and being associated with crime and disorder, or being used to support crime. Two, ensuring that gambling is conducted in a fair and open way. And three, protecting children and other vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. And I think it's that third one that I'm particularly keen and we're very keen to ensure that this statement of principles upheld. Indeed, the ability of a council's licensing arm to protect the citizens from exploitation from gambling companies is absolutely essential, and this statement of principles allows the council to better fulfil these goals. I'm pleased that we have a very strong gambling statement of principles here in Norwich, but I think at this point it is also important to note that in the last few years gambling has changed. So much of it now happens in the much more unregulated world of online gambling, and I think that there is a big question over the appropriateness of national legislation. Indeed, I would go so far as to say it is very much still analogue legislation in a very much digital age. I think we also need to remember that 1 in 5 people gambling online have a problem or at risk with high numbers of young adults betting, as figures for England have shown. Indeed, as I say, 18.2% of those participating in online gambling are at risk or harmful gambling. And the tragedy, of course, is that it is the poor, or those who are least able to lose those sums, that are the ones who are enticed to participate by what is often very unscrupulous mechanisms by the gambling industry. One study in Britain found that people in the lowest income categories are 3 times more likely to be classed as problem gamblers than the richest category. And the anecdotal evidence here in Norwich backs this up. Betting shops in the city centre, for example, are the ones that are most common, and this is an area where 17.8% of the local population live in fuel poverty, certainly well above the 13% that is the national average. It is not just a coincidence of where we find gambling shops, we also find poverty, and there is that link there, unfortunately. So just to return to this gambling statement of principles and some of the details within it, I really would like to thank colleagues for it, because I'm going to quote some of the text which says that careful consideration will be taken regarding the proximity of premises to schools, vulnerable adult centres, residential areas with high concentration of families with children, and importantly, areas of high deprivation. This is a really important factor and caveat within this statement of principles that fits in neatly with Gambling Commission's own advice, which notes, and I quote here, the need to protect consumers and the wider public. So in conclusion, I am delighted that this has come to council within the period required, and it ensures that our policies are up to date and our citizens are able to be shielded from some of the, as I say, excesses from what I consider an unscrupulous industry. I am delighted with the contents of this document, and in my opinion, it will help regulate an industry which is beneficial, in particular, to the most vulnerable in our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ackland, would you give your reply on behalf of the Dems, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I will be brief. I just want to echo what's been said about the importance of this item, and to thank officers, Tiffany in particular, really, for their work in updating the statement, and also to thank the licensing committee for their work on this, and in particular, questions about how to protect vulnerable people from being harmed or exploited by gambling. I think I'm just really what you said about Councillor Schmierer, but I think it's so important. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members who wish to speak on this item? No? Thank you. In which case, Councillor Jones, would you like to respond?
Thank you, and thank you for everyone's comments. And I think we all agree it is. I think we talk about gambling, but actually we're talking about public health issue in reality. We're talking about an addiction, and generally we talk about alcohol misuse, we talk about drug misuse, but I think there's far less discussion around gambling in that context, and it needs to be put in that because it is about treatment, but it's also about prevention. You know, public health is prevention before we move to treatment, and it's the easier option. So this policy can play its part in that, and I suppose that's something from the public health perspective I'm passionate about as a nurse. So I'm glad, and also just really glad as a portfolio holder that we are moving forward with these policies and actually getting a good range of them up to date and current, and I think that demonstrates a real change and commitment within this service, and thank you for everyone's support with this.
We'll now move to the vote, and all those in favour please indicate. That appears to be unanimous, thank you. So we now move on to item 7, appointments of representatives to outside bodies. Please note an updated appendix to the report has been circulated. This will be appointments to be considered. I've been advised there has been a further amendment to the appendix of the report. Please note that Councillor Schmierer is to be appointed to the vacancy on the Norwich Preservation Trust Limited. I call upon Councillor Kendrick to move item 7.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Well, I will obviously try to be brief given the agenda before us. Each year we appoint a wide range of representatives to outside bodies to confirm our support to them and the excellent work that those organisations do within our local community. And I am grateful to those members who give up their time to represent this council and hope they enjoy their time doing so. So again, I thank those who have undertaken this role in the past year and wish good fortune to those who will take it up in the coming year. In proposing the motion, I just want to update the council on a couple of matters. First, hopefully members will have received supplementary paper which confirms that it should be Councillor Kevin Maguire who is representative as appointed as our representative on the Norwich North Environmental, and it draws towards a conclusion. And secondly, I understand the vacancy on the Norwich Preservation Trust will be filled by Councillor Martin Meira, who I'm sure will add much value to the organisation given his extensive knowledge of local history. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. I'll call upon Councillor Driver to second the item.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. I welcome second this appointment. There seems to be some good appointments today. And there is a lot of outside bodies. And like every year, we just nod this through. But I would like a bit of information to come back during the year about what these people are actually doing on these committees. So I'd like to bring up in our group to see if anyone can actually come back and tell me what's going on and how these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Driver. We now invite group spokespersons. Councillor Calvert, will you give your reply on behalf of the Green Group, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. First of all, Councillor Driver, I completely agree with you about reporting back. I think that's an excellent motion. I too would love to hear what these people are doing. One of the things that I love about Norwich is its rich diversity of opinion and expertise. Over many years, as I've engaged with residents, neighbours, civic organisations and more, I'm always impressed with the talent, skills and knowledge that people are able to bring in the situation to bring to bear in the situation to the benefit of their communities. Within this very chamber which I sit today, I see just such a mixture of people looking to improve this fine city, both from those representing the 43% of the electorate who voted for this administration, and also those seeking to represent nearly 57% who did not. This council has a responsibility to make over 80 appointments to external organisations, including wholly owned companies, advisory boards, joint committees, charitable trusts, representative organisations and others, so as to ensure the voice of the people of Norwich is properly represented in those realms. This proposal will see over 90% of positions filled with Labour councillors or Labour ex-councillors. Whilst without doubt, a number of those appointed to have significant skills and abilities on which the city might draw, would it not be better for this council to draw the widest possible talent pool, as other, perhaps more open-minded local authorities do, rather than those who happen to sit closest to you in this chamber? As a friend, from a far bench, I invite the leader of the council to both consult widely and appoint widely in a year's time.
Thank you. Councillor Lovett, would you give your reply on behalf of the Leader, please?
Thank you. I certainly agree with Councillor Calvert. It is so obvious that we are not inclusive as a council, although we aim to be inclusive as a city, but more inclusion of other councillors would greatly benefit the system, I feel. I'm very privileged. I've had a place on the Norwich Preservation Board for many years, and I think I have benefited, and I hope that the Norwich Preservation Trust has benefited also. However, I heard Councillor Kendrick say that an appointment to an outside body confirms support for that body from this council. I do think that there are times when the council could be more supportive of some of these bodies, these outside bodies, especially knowing that they've got a councillor sitting on them. So when they ask for help, it would be nice to actually receive that help. And I am making particular reference to the Norwich Preservation Trust and certain planning issues that we could have done with a lot more help on to further the aims and make the Norwich Preservation Trust successful. And it's been a real struggle at times to get the attention of the council. So I just hope that that support from the council is there when they do appoint a member of the council to that body. And just a bit of nitpicking, I don't understand what the last paragraph on page 115 says. This report addresses the reserve and strengthen confidence in the council's governance framework. This report addresses the reserve and strengthen confidence. I mean, it's nitpicking, I know. Let's have some good English, shall we? So we can understand what it's all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. Are there any other members who wish to indicate to speak on this item? No? Thank you. In which case, Councillor Kendrick, would you like to respond? Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. When I move to the vote, all those in favour, please indicate. All those against? Abstentions? Thank you. Right, so now we move on to item 8 and the series of motions that we have before us. For members who are new to the chamber this year, we now have 45 minutes before we get to 9:30, which is the point we're going to have to take a view on the amount of business that's left. So we'll see how many we can get through with good debate, of course, before 9:30, and then we'll ask Council for its view on how we proceed from there. But before we do that, Councillor Stannard has given notice that he'd like to withdraw item 8G, Norwich bus fares. Can you confirm that, please, Councillor Stannard?
Yes, I can confirm that.
Thank you. So we now move on to item 8A, rights of the River Wensum. Please note that the motion published in the agenda had the incorrect proposer and seconder listed. Councillor Galvin will be proposing the motion, and Councillor Osborne will be seconding the motion. I call upon Councillor Galvin to move motion 8A.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I'll try to be brief. So with over 100 species of plants, thousands of kinds of invertebrates, and a relatively natural corridor, this river, the Wensum, is probably the best whole river of its type in nature conservation terms in our country. And globally, the chalk streams, of which is one, are rarer than rainforests. The river supports an incredible list of species, from chub, pike, eel, to kingfisher, little grebe, from sedge warblers to barn owls. Communities of plants include water lilies, the nationally scarce water dropwort, invertebrates including mollusks, water beetles and mayflies abound. And all the habitats the river supports are intrinsically linked. The cold chalk filtered water provides a rare habitat for a rich aquatic world. Rare and vulnerable species live here, including a minute whorl snail just 3 millimetres long, the brook lamprey and the bullhead fish. This amazing river flows through our city, but it isn't only biodiversity it gives us. It protects us from flooding, providing a natural corridor, cooling our air. It's a living link with our cultural heritage. Yet the Wensum is particularly under threat from abstraction and urbanisation, pollution from agriculture and industry and invasive species. It suffers from a lack of understanding. We take it for granted. It's important to pursue a whole river approach to this living part of our cityscape, recognising and linking up and downstream, and much has been done to bring organisations together, not least by this council. All those working for the river deserve recognition and support, but much more needs to be done. The organisations working for the river have signalled their interest in some potential support for this concept of rights of the river. So I'll go on to speak about that. I'll also just support the forthcoming motion and the interest in water quality, motion 8C, which shows that we're on the same page with this, very much on the same page. In January 22, we had a motion which again we passed, showing we're on the same page, which we all agreed to, had a range of actions in it, which again, I'm very pleased we passed. Because we need to take action in this, and we need to step up the scale and pace of the action. This takes things further, this motion. It makes us part of an emerging global movement of governments recognising the rights of nature. And local governments are important as national governments in this. We can do something locally. We don't have to sit in our hands and wait. We can take the initiative and start looking into this, and I really hope we will. Rights of nature, particularly rights of rivers, as it says, a way of rethinking our relationship with nature, from one of dominance to one of interdependency, requiring a respectful, holistic and empathetic approach. It can also act as a catalyst to shift our thinking from an extractive economy towards a regenerative economy, which is a very popular notion now, increasingly popular among farmers. We need to keep up with this and make sure we keep up as a city with the way thinking is changing into regeneration. The idea of nature having rights, though, is not new. Nature does have rights. What's new is how we can intervene using the rights of nature lens to protect nature and give the river a voice as a single entity. Many other places, not least in this country, recently have passed motions that will work for this. And we give rights to corporations globally. Companies are wholly fictional entities and they have rights. So it can be done for a river, it has been done, and we can do it here. So in closing, I'd just like to say that really this framework enables us to move forward. With many local wildlife bodies who've been in touch with me, inquiring about this, wanting to support it. We can be part of this, we can be part of the team that does this. We can put Norwich on the map. We have a river that is really globally important here and at risk. Let's get on with it, add it to our list of things that we're already doing and really set the pace on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne to second that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Formally seconded with the right to speak.
Thank you. I'll now invite group spokespersons. Councillor Maguire, will you give a reply on behalf of the Labour Group, please?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Admiral of the Wensum. Thank you to Councillor Galvin for putting this interesting, thought-provoking motion forward for consideration. Lord Mayor, Norwich is the proud commander of one of the most beautiful rivers in the country. The Wensum's chalk-bedded shores of distinct flora and fauna. Apart from anything else, it's the only intact swamp pit remaining in the UK. It curves and runs gracefully through our fine city. We all love the Wensum, so much so that this motion seems to have granted personhood or greater. And the poet in us all love this kind of metaphor. And as magical midsummer day approaches, through mist and drunken eye, we might imagine naiads dancing and giggling at the river's edge. We might, in our Elysian delights, wish to think of the river itself as a god, or surely at least an actual person. And as a metaphor, that is delightful. But that is all it is. The river is neither. A metaphor is only a metaphor. And if we entertain the idea as anything else, we go down a dangerous road of basing fact, policy, and even our actions on mere fantasy. Rivers are not people. Yes, it is a precious resource. The Wensum gives us drinking water. It's a conduit of trade, it's a place of leisure and recreation. It's an important ecosystem. But a river, even our precious Wensum, has no rights in and of itself. It is a dynamic and complex ecosystem. It is ever changing. And being tied up to the city makes its age uncertain. As it grows, it shifts beds, silting deposits change, and its course can narrow. People have rights and legal protections. They've been fought for over time by people. People have given their lives to win and protect our rights, and to seek freedom from oppression, to talk of a river having the rights in the way the human does, could be a dangerous step towards truly diminishing and trivializing our human rights. We have duties to protect ourselves and others in the enjoyment of those rights, and it is in the service of our rights that we protect rivers. We have laws that help us to achieve river protection, although clearly they are not used often enough. And so one might look at bodies corporate, which are sometimes treated as people. We soon see, however, that an attempt to equate rivers to companies and corporate bodies is naive. How can a river do wrong? A company can. How can we punish it when we're able to do wrong? We're grateful to have such a range and network of partnerships looking after our river, the Broads Authority, Norwich City Council, Norfolk County Council, Anglian Ward, the environment. They all have duties and responsibilities towards the river. We have so many wonderful charities and voluntary groups, including Norfolk Rivers Trust, Norwich Fringe Society, the Norwich Society, various friends groups. They all work together to protect the Wensum. But what can we do to fulfil the underlying object that every council in this chamber shares, that protecting the river? And in that, we have a practical agenda. It includes the work of the River Wensum strategy. It includes the amended motion passed last year on how best to protect the river. Later we have a motion which put the case for the water industry to put back into the hands of the people. It should not be controlled by those that profit from its use and the consequent damage to the natural environment. We need to deliver true sustainability in order to protect this river, and that means social, economic and environmental justice. That too takes structural change. Yes, let us protect and promote our river Wensum, but let's remember what it is, a river.
Councillor Lovett, would you like to reply on behalf of the Lib Dems?
Yes, thank you very much, and I really would like to associate what I say now with the proposer of the motion, and I'm very disappointed in the previous speaker for having a lack of imagination and ambition. The Liberal Democrat will be very happy to see this motion come to council. Our Lib Dem County colleague for Gaynwood South, Rob Colwell, brought a very remarkably similar motion to the County Council in March this year, and it was passed with support of all councillors of all parties. However, Rob's motion, Rights Over Rivers, encompassed all those rivers that fall within Norfolk, and it is a bit of a pity that this motion does not do the same and include the River Yare, which is every bit a Norwich River, forming part of the city's boundary to the south, giving Lakenham, Eton, University and Bowthorpe marshes for both recreation and wildlife habitat for us to enjoy. Our rivers are unique and have rare ecosystems, but after decades of neglect are slowly dying from pollution, habitat destruction and drought. The Norfolk Wildlife Trust indicates that pollution levels in our rivers place 10% of freshwater and wetland species at risk of extinction. This catastrophe is happening on our doorstep, and it must stop. The recent problems of nutrient neutrality have shown us that the economy of our city is intrinsically linked to the health of our rivers. The Local Government Association has estimated that 20,000 new affordable homes have been delayed because of polluted rivers. The impact of Norwich's economy as a whole due to nutrient neutrality is still to be calculated, and we are only still looking to implement our mitigation strategies. With this intrinsic relationship in mind, it's worth asking the question why the authorities, including Norwich and Norfolk councils, the Environment Agency and Anglian Water, haven't paid more attention to the quality of our rivers. Why weren't Anglian Water and the Environment Agency talking to the councils, warning them of the pollution levels? Why weren't the councils asking questions? Even the Labour group in an answer to a question last year about water quality, refused to even talk to the Environment Agency and Anglian Water, saying it's not their job. However, we are now as a council, I hope, at a place where we acknowledge the emerging global movement of governments recognising the rights of rights of nature, but particularly the rights of rivers. Rights of nature require a respectful and holistic, and I'm sorry I'm quoting exactly what Councillor Galvin said, rights of nature require a respectful, holistic and an empathetic approach to rethinking our relationship with nature, moving from one of dominance to one of interdependency. It is important that we transition from an extractive economy towards a regenerative green economy, of which the Rights of Rivers framework is a key part, and so I urge all councillors to support this motion.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors who'd like to say anything on this item, please? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. Yes, I was actually going to highlight, as Councillor Lovelock said, that the debate on a very similar motion at the County Council, the Labour group fully supported the Lib Dem motion, as well as the joint Lib Dem Green motion. So I am surprised that Labour seems to be not supporting it here, which seems to be potentially because it's coming from the opposition rather than for any other reason. I think Councillor Maguire raises valid questions about what we consider to be rights and what we allocate rights to. But equating rights of nature to rights of people or rights of businesses is a misunderstanding of the way that framework is meant to work. So in the same way that the rights of a person, a human being, are not the same as the rights of a corporate entity, because they are separate things. There's some overlap in the law, but the reason that framework has been created is in order to provide protection for businesses as well as for people. You can treat rivers as well as nature as having rights, and the idea of that is not that they are people that can do wrong, but the idea is that they are protected because, frankly, we're trashing the planet as it is now. We're trashing Norfolk, we're trashing the River Wenton and the River Yare and other parts of our city that provide so many benefits as Councillor Galvin said, but also, as well as the benefits that they provide for us as humans, which is what Councillor Maguire seems to be focusing on, also provide habitat for other living creatures. And so to take a very human-centric view actually serves to know what very well, because that's what's driving a lot of the ecocide that we're seeing at the moment. This is quite an abstract, top-level discussion, but actually the motion, as it's constructed, does call for practical actions as well. It calls for a charter for Wensum. Councillor Galvin has been talking to environmentalists and partners who have a vision for the way that Wensum can be protected, and that's why this motion is so focused on Wensum, because we have powers so that we have, as a council, responsibilities that we can enact, that we can bring forward to help protect what is a living thing. As Councillor Maguire himself highlighted, it is a living being that runs through our city. So I'm very disappointed that the Labour Council isn't supporting this motion. I think it's quite backward looking to not supporting.
Councillor Stannard, then Councillor Giles, and Councillor Hampton.
So, we looked at this motion very carefully, and there was a lot of good in it. We tried to think of amendments that we could put, but the basic premise, which is included in the preamble, which we can't amend, gave us some issues and problems. As I say, there's a lot of good in it, and there are things, we all want to protect the river, and we all want to see practical measures put in place to protect it. And you're right, as I agree, that the motion, the recommendations do contain that. But it seemed to me, on reflection, that the basic premise and some of what was written in the preamble was playing wrong. I mean, I would call it false equivalence. So, the statement that corporations are fictional entities, I mean, they're not. They exist, they're real. They're recognised in law. They can make decisions. They can be sued. They can be sued for corporate manslaughter, for example. They are real, and they have legal rights, and they have legal responsibilities. To suggest that there's an equivalence between that and a river, or a tree, or any other part of nature that you might choose to apply, is, as I say, false equivalence. It's a basic flaw in logic, which I hope you recognise. And if you're going to give if you're going to give that sort of equivalence, well, if the river floods, are we going to sue it? It's not the same thing. You cannot make that equivalence. Whereas if Angley Water was to flood a part of the city, we could sue them. It's not an equivalence. So, whilst we recognise there's a lot of good in this motion, I'm really concerned that if we pass it, it could be another conquer moment, and that we look silly. And it was said to me earlier in the week, if we passed it, it would put us on the map. Yes, it would put us on the map potentially if we pass it as it stands. I think it could be reworked into something that we could agree. But I think as it stands, it's not something that we're able to support.
Councillor Giles.
Thank you. Our river ecosystems are clearly under significant threat. However, I'm putting philosophical considerations to one side. I would question whether or not a rights-based approach to protecting rivers and other ecosystems is necessarily more effective than having strong environmental protection laws. The nature of rights declarations is they tend, I mean, it would be a declaration, we wouldn't be able to implement the rights of the river because it wouldn't have legal effect. But even if it were to have legal effect, the nature of rights treaties as they tend to be vague in their wording, and they tend to give an awful lot of power to the judiciary. And we've seen intergovernmental and supranational courts show a very large margin of appreciation, not only to signatories, member states, but also to corporations and employers within countries. So I would also question how justiciable rights of nature would be, how you would determine what classifies as infringement, and most importantly, who would represent the river rights, and who would represent any ecosystem in bringing a claim that their rights have been infringed. Clearly the river wouldn't be able to do it itself, so there would have to be a representative group that had local stand on before the courts in order to bring such claims. I don't see the detail in this motion of how it would practically implement it, and whether the rights-based approach to protecting natural resources would be more effective with strong environmental protection laws. So for that reason, I can't support the motion as it's currently worded. However, we of course acknowledge that the government and corporations are not doing enough to protect ecosystems such as rivers, and we need much stronger environmental protection laws to crack down on both the water companies and the agricultural sector that are failing to provide the stewardship for our rivers that so desperately needed.
Councillor Hampton, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I was literally just going to quickly pick up the point about county having passed this. The County Labour Group are an autonomous group. We have to be. You have to apply the same Labour values to the different political landscapes, the different geographical and practical landscapes. And as Councillor Galvin has already pointed out, we passed motions and taken stances here at the city before, which have much more tangible action than what is presented in this motion here tonight. And I've not seen wording of that county motion recently, at least, and we may well have come to a different conclusion compared to our county colleagues, but that's because we're looking at this specific motion that's here in front of us, and as city councils we're looking at it against everything else that this council has already passed and said and done with that behind us.
Councillor Price.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's really disappointing to hear speeches tonight. I suspect my colleague here said that because the motion is from the Greens is the reasoning behind this, because the wording is almost identical to the motion that the Labour Group supported fully at council. So it's really disappointing. And at the end of the day, the semantics about who's responsible and how is this implementable, etc. You have an opportunity to tell the people of Norwich that you take the health of the river seriously here tonight, and that's it. You're simply telling that down. But I turn to my colleague, Councillor Sands, on the other bench, who voted in favour of this motion, or a very similar motion at county, and I'll be watching how my colleagues vote, and I'd like to give him the opportunity ahead of the vote to explain if he's voting against it, what those reasons might be. Thank you.
Any other members wish to indicate at this stage that they wish to speak? Councillor Cowell.
I find it, frankly, a bit worrisome that the opposition, that they seem to have a mild obsession with punishing rivers. My children have, there's two things about my children. Both, they are real, I'm pretty sure of it. They have, and they also have legal rights. My children, you cannot sue them. If they flood, you can't sue them. If they overspill their banks, you can't imprison them. But, ladies and gentlemen, I assure you, they are real, and they have rights to protect them, just as a river could have rights to protect it.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. That's something of a false equivalent though, isn't it? Because children can be prosecuted from age 10 upwards, and also as a parent you're liable for your child's actions. I also just wanted to comment on the mention made of the health of the river. I don't think there's any doubt as to the fact that we all care about the health of the river. I just don't think we need to be told that we have to personify it in order to do so.
Thank you, Mayor. There's been lots of reference to false equivalence. I would just like to highlight that false equivalence is built around the idea of inherent bias or unconscious bias. I would suggest that we need a paradigm shift in society to deal with the ecological crisis and to look at something holistically, such as a river, in its entirety, as this motion would propose, could only be a positive thing. And I see no reason to go against this motion at this time.
Any other members wish to speak? In which case I'll ask Councillor Galvin to respond.
Thank you, everybody, for your points. Obviously disappointing to hear that perspective taken. I think perhaps moving ahead too fast to judgment. If you look at point 3 of the resolution, we're exploring the communities and relevant stakeholders, the implementation, working towards the production. I think that's very carefully worded and clear, so it's a chance really. So that picks up quite a few points. What I'd really like to say is that, in response to the points, is that we're part of nature. We're part of nature. Yeah? We need to work together on this. It's an emergency. We've actually got 14% of our rivers in the UK in good state. 14%. So those are just points that are very simple, very clear. If you want to talk about false equivalence, we've given freedom of the city to Jarrods. We've given freedom of the city to Norfolk and Surrey, to RAF Marlborough, to Norwich Union. Okay? Why not? We could recognise the river like this. Why not open our minds a bit and try and move forward? We're in a really difficult situation now. I think we can all recognise that. We can get a little bit beyond reacting quickly against things and try and work together on it. As indeed you've shown the well capable of counting. Just to wrap up, I did want to go back to nutrient neutrality. There's 27 rivers served notice from Natural England, or councils served notice from Natural England not to grant any planning applications which involve an overnight stay, which was, came as a big shock. It didn't come as a shock to me. Having worked in that sector for a long time, we've been predicting that for years, as has the European Union. But here people sat in happy torpor while rivers are trashed. I don't want us to carry on like that. I want us to change. We have a chance to do it. And at the moment, we are still dumping phosphates and nitrates into them through sewage and runoff, causing eutrophication and ruination of water quality and the subsequent death of aquatic and other ecosystems. I'm sorry to repeat it, but I have to. And recently it's come to light that the process of deciding the best sites for mitigation as part of nutrient neutrality, and this is from experts, there are worries that that's not being determined by this council in the light of existing evidence for where they would make the best impact on the health of the river. And people are asking us to avoid the danger of commodity brokerage training for the river. This is raised by experts. So I think this is something we need to take seriously. I'm glad you've looked at it. I'm extremely disappointed in your approach, but we won't give up.
Thank you. We'll now move to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate. Thank you. All those against? That motion fails. Thank you. The motion is for local traffic schemes. I call upon Councillor Stollard to move the item.
I will try and be brief. I'm aware of the time and how much business you've got to get through. Council, we were dismayed when the County Council unilaterally withdrew from Norwich Highways Agency agreement a few years ago. The arrangement, which provided for a joint committee of county and city councillors with an inbuilt county majority successfully delivering excellent highway schemes for over 4 decades. It was an example of exemplary and mature partnership working where all parties focused on areas of agreement rather than difference in order to pursue mutually agreed strategies, policies and schemes for highways in the city. The meetings were almost always not partisan and were able to concentrate on the practical delivery of agreed strategies. The agency also had a team of transport planners and managers who were based in City Hall and understood the particular transport needs of Norwich as a very large urban area with different characteristics and needs to the remainder of the county. The agency delivered many excellent sustainable transport initiatives, including the pedestrianisation of city streets and the closure of city centre through routes for private cars. New bus lanes were introduced to improve reliability and encourage people to use public transport instead of a private car. It also oversaw the delivery of the Cycle City Ambition programme, which successfully increased the number of cycle journeys in the city. All these measures have improved air quality in the city and have created much more space for pedestrians, creating a pleasant environment in which to enjoy all the centre has to offer. We know that pedestrianisation increases footfall, increases time spent lingering in the city, and increases the amount of money spent in city centre businesses of all kinds, be they retail or leisure. These policies are an important part of why Norwich has benefited from a much more resilient and vibrant centre than most other towns and cities of the size. Fewer vacant units and floor space, and footfall now back well above pre-pandemic levels. It continues to enjoy inward investment with new shops and restaurants open, a hotel plan for the former Tesco store, and plans for investment and development of sites which became empty as a result of company failures at a national level during the pandemic, for example the former Debenhams and Top Shop sites. Some of those units, for example the former Jack Wills, are already occupied. The economic successes of the city centre, especially compared to many other towns and cities, has happened because the City Council has had a comprehensive strategy for the city centre and has worked in partnership with business and the County Council. The Highways Agency is just one of those successful partnerships. So we were, of course, bemused when the County Council decided unilaterally, without consultation, to terminate this agreement. I won't again go over the detail of how this decision was made. That is now water under the bridge. But at the time, the City Council was keen to get the best replacement arrangement we could and negotiated a decision-making committee on which we had 2 votes. However, it then turned out that the committee could not in fact make decisions and could only advise the chair of the committee and county cabinet member for transport when they made decisions. Earlier this year, the new cabinet member for transport informed his first meeting that he had made some decisions in advance of it. Then, when for very good reason he was unable to attend the next meeting, the vice chair took charge, meaning that he was not able to hear and take part in the debate before making any decisions. Council, as I've said, this council wants to make the current arrangements work in everyone's interests. I've written to the county cabinet member this week in a very constructive tone, making that intention very clear, but requesting that he should always be present at meetings and should listen to the advice of the committee before making decisions. I await his reply. Meanwhile, our colleagues on the Labour group of the County Council have proposed that there should be a form of delegated decision-making to a joint body for all transport matters in district councils, similar to the former Highways Agency in Norwich. It is clear that this isn't just an issue for Norwich, but for all districts, and we welcome their proposal and the opportunity to discuss this matter again. The Highways Agency arrangement was incredibly successful. It delivered many excellent schemes. It benefited both city and county in many ways, and an independent report by Grant Thornton, just months before its demise, found it to be effective and value for money, with no criticisms of any aspect of it. Therefore, while we will continue to work with the County Council positively and constructively to try to make current arrangements work, I would ask that we support this motion to put the possibility of a new delegated joint highways arrangement back on the agenda.
Councillor Hampton, would you like to second the item, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Stannard for introducing this motion tonight and explaining some of the context behind the ask we're making here. Given his work over the past years on local transport and on the Transport for Norwich Committee in its various forms, he's certainly best placed to talk about what has worked, what hasn't, and how we can resolve that. But following our latest cabinet reshuffle, responsibility for transport is set to transfer into my portfolio, so I'll talk tonight a bit about the principles and priorities behind our vision for transport in Norwich, which we will have a greater chance of realising under an arrangement where we and the communities we represent have a greater say. And the fact that we bring transport into the climate change cabinet portfolio hopefully immediately gives a sense of the context we want to be looking at this in. Transport is the second highest source of carbon emissions in Norwich, just behind domestic, and the largest cause of air pollution. Tackling transport emissions will be key if we're to reach citywide net zero and ensure a clean, healthy city environment. But as it stands, council has put a disproportionate amount of resource into designing and chasing funding for new roads, which induce more traffic, more emissions and more pollution compared to sustainable and active modes of transport. This balance needs to be addressed. We want to be promoting accessible, well-thought-out local schemes that make it easy for people to walk, wheel, cycle and use public transport in Norwich, transitioning us towards a future where private vehicle use rarely has to be a necessity. This, of course, has to be a just transition, making sure the cost doesn't fall on those who can support it, ensuring the city remains accessible to all, and making sure there's adequate support for businesses. And as ever, we recognise that this will require a significant amount of support or resource from the government, which has been lacking. The city centre is, of course, an important transport hub, but highways matters affect communities across the city. For example, when County ended the previous arrangement, they took back control of verges and street streets, important parts of our local environment which can help boost biodiversity and make our streets more attractive. I'm sure members across the chamber have heard over and over again from residents about their disappointment about reduced maintenance on this front. We will always be committed to working in partnership with Norfolk County Council on transport and highways issues in order to get the best possible outcomes for our city, while also recognising our strategic importance across the county too. But at the same time, we do want to see a reinstatement of a joint arrangement that brings decision making closer to the communities these decisions affect. So I hope councillors can support this motion tonight.
I'm now going to invite group spokespersons. Councillor Osborne, would you like to reply on the Green Group, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We welcome this motion to reinstate NHAC or something like NHAC, or a revised or updated form of it. The previous agreement wasn't without problems, I'm sure everyone will agree. It makes no sense that Conservative councillors who do not represent the city are making decisions about how we travel in the city. I want to say that the City Council has a really good vision for transport. The set out the response to the Transport for Norwich strategy, which I recommend that everyone here reads, actually really excellent, including calls for a workplace parking levy, an ambition to reduce overall car traffic, and of course improve public and active travel. And despite having power strip on them in 2020 or 2021, the City Council have been instrumental in driving through changes like exchange streets and some benefit streets for people that do need some more enforcement to make them work properly. I want to highlight, before I go on, that Green councillors represents the centre where a disproportionate amount of the transport changes under Transport Cities funding have taken place, but we have no representation on the Transport Norwich Committee, even if that is inadequate for other reasons. So there is going to be a new NHAC committee. I hope that it will be politically balanced and representative of councillors who represent the city centre wards as well. I do want to thank Councillor Stoddart personally for support on active travel schemes in Mancroft. I've been really impressed actually in seeing emails that Councillor Stoddart has sent to residents of mine that I've been copied into that show a clear commitment to improving access to pedestrians and businesses in pedestrianisation of the Exchange Street and some benefits. That said, in other areas where the council has got some good commitments, there's also been some confusion. For example, for several years, Green Council has asked how the council intends to reduce car parking in the city, both at an overall level and reduce council dependence on car parking income. Council leaders have variously stated that they're committed to achieving that there's going to be a pipeline of developing car parks into housing sites, which is a really good thing. But also the opposite views from council leadership, saying that we need to continue inflow of cars into the city, which I don't think anyone is denying in total. But the direction of travel from the council hasn't always been clear. So I hope that in this debate, Councillor Stoddart or the administration can make very clear that we fully support reducing car parking spaces in the city ensure that that's in practice. Finally, before I wrap up, I'd like to say that while we support the idea of having the City Council have greater say in the transport, we should also be exploring ways of giving residents a greater say, especially with design transport schemes, rather than getting a consultation after the fact, after something's already been designed. There should be more deliberative processes, deliberative decision making that involve residents in the design process. And we need to be thinking beyond just consultation and beyond the party political mechanics of county versus city. So we need to be taking transport beyond that party politics and actually getting residents to say as well.
Thank you. Councillor Lovelock, would you like to respond on behalf of the Liberal Democrats?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Whilst in general the Liberal Democrats welcome devolution, the details and conditions of that devolution ideally need to be known before support can be given for a particular scheme. I do think that this is a very optimistic idea. The County Council has shown no intention to give back the very special delegated joint highway scheme which they took away 3 years ago. And I am aware that the Norfolk County deal does include a devolved transport plan. So perhaps it's Labour jumping the gun and saying, oh, look what we achieved. If the deal goes ahead, the Norfolk deal, there will be devolution. And what form that will take with regard to traffic schemes, it remains to be seen. So, I mean, I'm a bit sort of doubtful about whether this is going anywhere, but in general, I do support devolution. Now, the buses are so integral to transport in the city, especially in the city centre. So what happens if that's kept by county? So they're deciding on what happens to the buses, and we're deciding what happens to local traffic schemes. It wasn't an ideal situation when we had the agency. We were always outnumbered. The chair was always a Conservative, and actually they got what they wanted. And some of the time it was what we wanted as well. But there were times when I was absolutely appalled by a waste of money. £500,000 on enlarging South Park Avenue so buses could pass, and we couldn't get double yellow lines put down. So what have we got now? We've got buses that can't park on South Park Avenue because cars park there, because there's no double yellow lines. There was no joined up thinking then, that wasn't good. And then nearly £1 million spent on the Mile End Road with all sorts of so-called improvements. And what have we got now? We've still got traffic there. Certain times of the day, it's a bottleneck. So I do think that it wasn't perfect then, and I don't know that taking it back in-house now would make it perfect. Also, we make decisions that local people don't like, so it's not always good decision making when it's closest to the people affected by it. I mean, look at Eton Park, 91% didn't want car parking charges, but they were imposed by this council. So I do feel that we don't always make the best decisions for our residents. I think probably I'll leave it there. We will support it, but this came as a result of Labour county councillors at the county deciding that they wanted it, not quite because the Conservatives were thinking of any other alternative arrangement. So I think this is a very, very long shot. I think we're more likely to get some sort of devolution out of the Norfolk deal, and then we will see the conditions that go with it, the money that comes with it, and the restrictions that come with it. And I think that's a better time to take decisions about policy. Thank you.
Are there any other members who'd like to speak on this item? Councillor Price.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll reiterate the words that my colleague has said, and we would most definitely support that. I've been here long enough now to remember NHAC here at the council before, and what I would say is that the officers at the county council have been very helpful and very efficient in supporting ward councillors, and our officers did the best job that they could, but there always seemed to be a resource gap when we had responsibility. So I would hope sincerely that if we were to get these powers back, that they would be resourced better than they previously were. Another advantage that has occurred since I've become a county councillor is that I actually received a £10,000 bursary where I can help deliver some much needed changes by speaking to the residents and delivering things that are just not on the radar of the big council. So I would, again, be hopeful that we could retain something like that. The cabinet members that represented highways, previous Councillor Wilby, very proud of his Dickleborough area that he represented and was supportive. He would come out to see the ward councillors, he would come and see the issues on the ground. But it was clear that some officers and he himself do not have that intricate knowledge that we all have being residents of Norwich. So there is a great advantage to be had by having these powers coming back. And the Green Group, I'm sure, will support here and at county. And perhaps devolution, perhaps the next election, also at county, we can make that happen together. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Any other members wish to speak at this stage? Okay, in which case I'll ask Councillor Stannard if you'd like to respond, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, colleagues, for your comments. And just to pick up what Ben just said, let's not assume that the Tories are still going to be in control at County Hall after the next county elections, the way things are going at the moment. The political landscape could change quite a lot. And I accept then how it wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect. But I would say we got what we wanted most of the time. And that's because we sat around the table and had mature debates based on getting the county council to agree to a transport strategy, which we were happy with. So it most of the time worked well. Yeah, it didn't always get it right. Errors are made, errors are still being made in the city, certainly by the county at the moment, and you will know about that. Resident involvement, I think there are all sorts of ways that if we were managing the process, that we could look at how we consult and how we involve residents more proactively, and that would be something that we could consider. What I would say about this, however, is we are trying to make it clear that whilst we will work within current arrangements while we're there to get the best from them that we can, we've put this back on the table for debate, particularly given some of the errors and mistakes which have been made by the county while they've been running this service. And I think Councillor Price is again correct. The team we had here, maybe the stretch, it understood the city. It understood the urban needs of the city. It's really, really important to be in a position where transport decisions, as Jamie said, are being made by rural backbench Tory councillors is not representing the interests of the people of the city. And so I think there's some issues of principle here. So we put the debate back on the table, and I think this is an opportune time to do that. Finally, yeah, we do have a pipeline of brownfield car park sites that we want to develop for housing and to take out of use. We need to find a way of reducing our dependence on car parking, because at the moment it earns us a considerable amount of money, so we need to have a strategy for that before we actually start maintaining and implementing it. But we also, remember, do have a cap on car parking spaces in the city. I don't think we're very near it at the moment, but certainly there's not going to be an increase. That's not what's planned.
Thank you. We'll now put the item to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate. That is unanimous. Thank you. So, those of you who are keen students of the time will note that we are past the 2-hour mark. So we need to address the issue of the remaining motions and how they are dealt with. Motions 8D and 8E. So 8D is the protection and recovery of the SWIFT populations, and 8E is worker representations on boards. Both of those are opposed by default because they have unaccepted amendments, so we will need to pick those up after a short break. I just would like to take Council's view on 8C, sewage discharging rivers and coastal waters. Does anyone wish to oppose this item? No opposition to that. So that one. Councillor Sands, you wish to oppose 8C?
I missed what you were saying.
You were talking.
We wish to discuss the motion.
You wish to oppose the motion?
No, we oppose the motion to not discuss this current motion, if that makes sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense. So the Constitution requires you to stipulate if you are in opposition to motion 8C.
Yes.
You are in opposition to motion 8C, a motion you're moving yourself. Right? Okay, thank you very much. So 8C is opposed by the mover. I'm not sure if the Constitution can deal with that.
Lord Mayor, I oppose the motion.
You oppose the motion as well. So that leaves us 8F. Now 8F is being amended by the mover per point 71 of the Council's Constitution. Now that is perfectly fine and in order. So are there any, is there any opposition to 8F? Councillor Jones, do you oppose your own motion?
As long as it's the amended version, I'm happy with that.
It is the amended version. Okay, thank you for that. So, we will now have a 10-minute break. No more than 10 minutes. In 10 minutes' time, we will begin item 8C. Councillor Sands, if you're not at your seat, then Just standing by because I gather that someone may have something to say on opposition to amendments. You've got 20 seconds to make up your decision, make up your mind on that, please. Those members who return back to the chamber, 8E, the opposition against the amendments have been withdrawn, and will be therefore able to take that as unopposed business. So 8E, worker representation. No, that's unopposed now, so thank you. So we now move over to item 8C, sewage discharges in rivers and coastal waters. I call upon Councillor Mike Sands to move the motion, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I move the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Sands, for your concise speech.
But do you want me to give my speech now, or do you want it seconded first?
Well, it's custom to give the speech at the point when we're moving it.
Okay then, so I'll begin my speech now. If I wanted to anthropomorphise the River Wensum, I might sing a song by Christy Moore, A Stream Does Rise. However, I'd sooner a motion that deals with the issues that face us. Lord Mayor, I'm pleased to move this motion this evening, which is a necessary response to the national Tory sewage scandal, which has polluted waters and open spaces across the country, including in Norwich and the Norfolk countryside and coastal areas with filthy raw sewage. Analysis shows that since 2016 there has been 1,276 years worth of raw sewage, which has been dumped into the British waters. I'm not too sure how that figure was calculated, but obviously it covers all areas. On average, this equates to a new Tory-sanctioned sewage dumping event taking place every 2.5 minutes in places where people live, work and holiday. In 2022 alone, there were 824 sewage dumps a day across the country. 13 years of Tory government has taken our country backwards, allowing rivers and seas to be treated as an open sewer. Not one English river is classed as being in a healthy condition. None meet good chemical standards and few meet good ecological standards. Not only have the Conservatives given the green light for water companies to dump sewage and neglect our vital water infrastructure, they've also rewarded them for it by allowing shareholders to simply walk away with billions in dividends and with bumper bonuses for negligent water losses. The Financial Times and The Guardian both reported on the 9th of May this year that water and sewage companies across Britain paid out 1.4 billion over just the past year in dividends to shareholders, much of this going overseas. Anglia Water reported to have paid 95 million in dividends, again, much to overseas shareholders, with an estimated 15 billion in dividends to be paid out to shareholders over the rest of this decade. Yet all the while this is going on, these same water companies, including Anglia Water, which covers the largest area in terms of land mass of responsibility in Britain, are discharging millions of megalitres of untreated effluent into our rivers and seas, leading to eutrophication and the poisoning of whole ecosystems. The River Lim, for example, on the border of West Dorset and Devon, has been declared ecologically dead. While our rivers across Norfolk and in the city are not quite in that state, we've had 3 beaches lose their blue flag status. In May of last year, Anglia Water was called to account, and again in May this year. The list has changed, except that development across the city and most of the county has been halted due to eutrophication, 70% of which is attributed to sewage discharges. This is simply not acceptable. During the passage of the Environment Act last year, Conservative MPs had the opportunity to support a Labour-backed amendment that would have brought an end to sewage dumping. However, instead of putting the country first, Tory MPs voted to continue the Tory sewage scandal. This despite the consequences for our environment, for public health, for business that rely on the beauty and nature of Britain to attract visitors and thrive. No one should have to worry about whether they're able to enjoy our areas of outstanding beauty. No business should have to worry about Tory-sanctioned sewage dumping impacting their trade. It is clear that we have a Tory government that's run out of road, allowing, on average, an additional £670 to be added to our water rates by the water companies in the coming few years. This is an annual increase, I might add. If we are to build a better Britain and end the Tory sewage scandal, we need to firstly begin by delivering mandatory monitoring on all sewage outlets, introducing automatic fines for discharges, and setting ambitious targets for stopping systematic sewage dumping, and ensuring that water bosses are held to account for negligence. But we also need to think wider than that and more creatively. So this motion also supports the idea of new models of ownership of water, including that which is cooperative, municipal or public. The key is thinking of models which protect water, improve its quality, make it affordable for all, invest in the infrastructure critically needed to maintain it, and lock the value of this into the community, which then makes any future privatisation that's happened in the 1990s much, much harder. Lastly, we should not forget that decades ago this council had control of water supply and services were provided at municipal level at low cost to the Norwich citizen. The buildings along Waterworks Road, now run by Anglia Water, bear the beautiful City of Norwich crest and show that what can happen when local authorities are empowered to provide a much greater range of public services. Who knows, perhaps these days could return. One of the unfortunate effects of sewage discharge is, of course, we've heard earlier from a number of people, that discharge of phosphates and nitrates into our rivers and seas. And yet 92% of phosphates are recoverable, and these can be returned into industrial use, as phosphate is a valuable chemical contained in your very bones, in fact, and similar with nitrates. But in the meantime, please support this motion, which has also been supported at the County Council, and let's put a mark around that enough is enough, and Norwich demands and deserves better. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Hampton, would you like to second the item, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Sands for bringing forward this important motion and highlighting the outrage of water companies being able to pump more sewage into our rivers and coastlines. We've already discussed tonight how much this council and city manager of Wensum and is committed to protecting and enhancing it. This motion calls for practical action towards the same. First off, it welcomes the government's intention to consult on the introduction of Schedule 3 Flood and Water Management Act 2010, which would make sustainable drainage systems mandatory for new developments. As I say, this is welcome, but that's not to detract from the government's failure over the past 30 years to make any real progress on this issue. Let's not forget, and as Councillor Sands has said, Norfolk Tory MPs, including Norwich North's Chloe Smith, have frequently voted against action to end sewage discharges, including in April blocking Labour's water quality sewage discharge bill, which would have made monitoring all sewage outlets a legal requirement, would have implemented legally binding targets on reducing spills, and would have imposed automatic fines for sewage dumping. The motion here also supports the idea that water companies should be automatically liable for any sewage discharges. They should be faced with swift, automatic fines and should be liable for compensating impacted businesses. For example, firms operating in the leisure and tourism industry would see a fall in trade and be deterred from visiting or participating in activities on the water where there have been spills. But this motion ultimately recognises that we want to see water companies brought back into public, municipal or cooperative control in order to strengthen accountability and transparency and to realign priorities according to those of the public, which would include protecting our rivers and coastlines, bringing down bills and improving service quality. Polling has shown that over 2/3 of the British public, including a clear majority of Tory voters, Labour voters, Red Wall Street voters, etc., all want to see water back in public ownership. We all need water and we all have no choice about where we get our water from on a day-to-day basis. So we deserve to know that our water provider is working in our interests, not those of owners and shareholders. Sewage dumping is an environmental, economic and health hazard, and it's an issue that does need to be tackled from multiple fronts. This motion sets out some of the immediate shifts in priority that are needed, as well as the need for public ownership as a long-term safeguard. So I hope members can support it tonight.
Thank you. And now I'll call upon group spokespersons. Councillor Fox, would you like to reply on behalf of the Green Group, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As an enthusiastic open water swimmer and a lover of river ecology, and someone who helped to organise a dirty water campaign in Norwich earlier this year, I very much welcome any hint towards cleaning up our waterways. In recent meetings with Anglia Water and the Environment Agency, I was surprised to hear that Anglia Water were unaware of the extent of the immediate use of the River Wensum in our city centre. Whereas walking along the river in this recent sunny weather, it's easy to see that more and more people are using the river as a form of exercise and relaxation. And there are indeed 300 plus scouts jumping into that water every week. It's an incredible resource for well-being and improved mental health. Anglia Water and the Environment Agency said that one of the things that informs how frequently water quality is tested is whether the body of water has bathing water status or not. So this is maybe something that the council could consider in future. The first part of this motion, as I understand it, speaks to central government policy. And while I too believe that water companies should be held liable for sewage discharge and be liable for compensation for those, I personally don't know how much this council had the ability to influence central government policy on these things. And I'm really keen that this chamber is a hub for action. As anyone who's ever been involved in trying to sort of protect environmental issues for any length of time will tell you, the thing that frustrates them most is warm words without matching action. So while I welcome this motion, I think it makes sense to hold ourselves to account too and look at the things that we as a council can directly do to influence cleaner water in our city. For example, Anglia Water have agreed to supply local groups such as Sea Scouts and open water swimming groups with testing kits and have agreed to provide people with the correct training to use these. And I wonder if there's anything we can do to support these groups to have a more joined-up approach by providing a central, credible and easily accessible online place to log and map testing sites and results. And citizen science like this can also be used to help hold companies to account who don't uphold their responsibilities. And I also wonder if there are things that we can do around signage to highlight the importance of some of the species that live in our rivers and highlight the biodiversity and amenity value of our rivers. I guess what I'm trying to say is, how much will central government listen to our requests? And I don't know, but I fear that we don't have a huge amount of influence in that sphere and encourage us all to look at what meaningful things we can do to help improve the situation. I have to admit that I'm a little confused about point 2 of the motion, which states that this council resolves to support all options to bring water companies back into public, municipal or cooperative ownership. I think that's utterly brilliant plan, and I'm delighted by it, but I'm confused because Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has been reported as saying that Labour will not commit to renationalise water. So if that's been turned around or wrong about that, please do let me know. So while I absolutely welcome this part of the motion, I hope that members of the Cabinet will also be contacting the Labour Party Central Administration to ask that they commit to renationalise this essential life-giving substance. It's great to know that this council recognises the health risks posed by sewage spills, but of course this is only one of the threats to health that's carried in our waterways. I'd encourage councillors to look into the emerging evidence of PFAs, polyfluoroalkyls or forever chemicals, some of which are extremely harmful to health. The Environment Agency's monitoring has found that these are widespread in standing and groundwater and present in the fish caught in our rivers. For those who'd like to know more about this, an impactful starting point might be to watch the movie Dark Waters, so there's some interesting homework for us all. That film highlights the impacts of just one of these chemicals found in Teflon and the many deaths that it caused. Of course, the ultimate point here is that my body is made up of 80% water. Your bodies are made up of 80% water. I guess that, I think it's about right. And so is the body of everybody else on the planet. Other cultures see rivers as being a connected part of that lifeblood.
these cultures do see the rivers as part of their person.
Councillor Fox, could you draw your remarks to a close, please?
Yes, Lord Mayor. So just on that point, I really welcome this motion, but I welcome it only as a stepping stone towards action.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews, would you like to reply on behalf of the Dems, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I'll try not to be repetitive here. Recent data released by the Environment Agency gives the total number of sewage overspills at monitored outlets in England last year as over 300,000, totaling over 825 each day, and that's only outlets which are monitored. Surveys Against Sewage found that raw material had been discharged 3,000 times into English and Welsh bathing water beaches in 2020. And we have to say it's happened right here in Norwich and on our coast. Following the impact on the UK's supply chains from Brexit and the recent pandemic, the government enabled companies to discharge sewage at any time if there was a lack of treatment chemicals. While some releases may be partially treated, storm overflows are raw and diluted only by rainwater. As a result, they contain anything that goes down the drain, from human waste to household chemicals and plastics, as we just heard. Beyond just being unpleasant, sewage causes serious damage to waterway ecosystems, plant, animal and human health. Lib Dems have been heavily involved in the national debate on this, calling for a sewage tax on the profits of water companies to be used to fix Britain's leaking sewage system. A ban on bonuses for water company bosses, with that money being used instead to invest in keeping Britain's water clean and safe. Last year alone, as we heard, water companies paid out dividends to the tune of almost £1 billion, with water company executives pocketing £16.5 million in bonuses, an amount I can't even begin to contemplate. In February, Lib Dem MP Richard Ford managed to get an amendment passed in Parliament that ensures that the government's new infrastructure bank will not invest in water companies unless they produce a costed and time-limited plan to end sewage discharges into local rivers. Speaking on this, Richard said it's shocking that this practice has been allowed to continue and that the government has resisted several attempts by the Liberal Democrats and Labour to clamp down on these sewage spills. This motion asks that we support all options to bring water companies back into public, municipal or cooperative ownership, and we support this, but bearing in mind that it might not wave the magic wand that solves everything. A caveat is that the Scottish Government owns the statutory corporation Scottish Water, which provides all water to Scottish houses, and in some ways they perform worse than our company, so that's a caveat. Our Lib Dem approach includes promoting a public benefit company model for water companies, so that economic and environmental policy objectives must be considered explicitly in the running of the company, with local environmental groups having a place on water company boards. We should reduce the number of licences given to water companies, permitting them to discharge sewage into rivers, and I believe this could actually be done in the short term, and strengthen Ofwat's powers to hold companies accountable and fining them for discharging raw sewage into rivers. Ministers are apparently set to announce plans to make polluters pay, addressing all sources of pollution, including plastics and chemicals used in farming. It is time for this government to show that they have a serious plan, which is both costed and time limited, to clean up their act and end the flow of sewage gushing onto our beaches and into our rivers. The dumping of sewage in our waterways has appalling consequences for our environment, on our local tourism economy, on our wildlife, and on the health of people who swim in our rivers and seas. It's critically important that we all keep up the pressure on the Conservative government to act quickly and to tackle pollution in our seas and rivers, We're very happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members wish to speak on this item? Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just one point hasn't been talked about so much, and yet is so central to that's water conservation. And one of the things I can remember in the 70s with the Wilson-Callaghan governments was then there were plans to have national grid of water. The idea of using waterways, canals, rivers to move water around and to share water. That was an easy enough thing to achieve when water was owned by the people. And then in the 80s, I witnessed that gradual loss. Water authorities, to start with, water companies, and then this complete privatisation, where the consideration is only for the bottom line. And it makes things like water conservation, water sharing, so much more problematic. And I think it must take a national movement if we're to get anything like this happening.
Thank you. Councillor Lovell.
Thinking what Amanda said about practical solutions, we are as a council now retrofitting some of our council houses to conserve water, and thereby getting credits to allow houses to be built. But unfortunately, those houses that are being built do not have water butts, and it seems absolutely basic to me that any house that is built should have sufficient water butts to take the runoff from the roof. If you actually separate out runoff from the houses so that it goes into water butts, then you won't have so much overflow of sewage, because the sewers can cope with it, because when we have flash floods, a lot of the water is separated out before it goes down the sewer. But nobody seems to be talking about the need to make sure every house that is built has water butts to retain some of the water, and then you, of course, you use it on your garden. I mean, they're not expensive things if the house is built with them, but when you try and retrofit them, they are more difficult. If you want a huge one underground, you know, that's really quite difficult. But 1,000 litres you can put on the edge of the outside of a house. We've got 2,000 litres on one side, containers, and 1,500 on the other side. And you know, when it rains, they all fill up, and we've got water galore for the garden. But it is such a simple thing, and yet we are not doing it. But we are retrofitting our council houses with water-saving devices. Crazy.
Any other speakers wish to indicate? In which case, Councillor Mike Sand, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I welcome the comments made by our colleagues across the chamber. It's apparent that the water companies represent monopolies, and their main aim is to monetise water resources and to for the collection of profits rather than the collection of potable water and bathable water for people to drink and to swim in. I agree in part with Councillor Lovett's comments concerning water butts. The trouble is a lot of our newer houses simply don't have the space for those, but there could be provision for the separation of sewage and stormwater. I know where Sue and I grew up in Australia, the sewage and stormwater systems were two completely separate systems. So when stormwater was collected and run off, it didn't go into sewage farms and mixed with sewage. The sewage was treated entirely separately. So perhaps that's something that can be developed in the long term, but of course that's largely dependent on government policy, because it would require a national thing. But yet I do welcome the comments, and I do recognise that we are looking at changing completely the system of ownership, perhaps back to some form of municipal ownerships or corporation ownerships, perhaps some sort of national ownerships of water resources. It's something which we all need to aim for. So I welcome the comments and thank everyone for the comments they've made. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now put the item to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate. That's carried unanimously. I'm absolutely delighted that the force of the argument that's been debated this evening has overcome the initial opposition and led us to be here discussing this. So thank you very much everyone for that. So one of the things that the Constitution requires of me, and we're sort of approaching the 3-hour mark, is that at a point at 3 hours or at a convenient point beforehand to basically seek guidance from Council on how to proceed. So at the 3-hour mark we basically finish unless you wish otherwise. So does anyone wish for us to continue past the 3-hour mark, which by debating the item on Swiss would inevitably lead to? If so, would they like to move that, please? Councillor Giles? You're moving an item to continue the debate on Swiss. Yeah, thank you. Does anyone wish to second that, please?
Yes.
Yeah, Councillor Jones has seconded this. This is a procedural motion to continue the debate, so we debate the item on Swiss. We're now moving to a vote on that discussion. All those in favour, please indicate. All those against? Abstentions? That's carried. So we've agreed to continue beyond the 3-hour mark. So we will now move on to item 8D, protection and recovery of the swift population. An updated version of the motion has been circulated to members. This is the motion to be considered this evening. An amendment to motion 8D has been received from Councillor Giles, which has been circulated. Councillor Champion has indicated that he was willing to accept this amendment. If no other member objects, the amendment will become part of the substantive motion. Any objections? So there are 2 amendments, and we're dealing with that. So this is the one you've agreed to. Yep. So any objections to that? No? Thank you. Another amendment to item 8D has been received from Councillor Giles, which has been circulated. This is where the confusion, I think, arrives. 2 amendments, same councillor. Councillor Champion has indicated that he is not willing to accept this amendment. It will therefore be dealt with in the usual way after the substantive motion has been moved and seconded. So I now call upon Councillor Champion to move item 8D as amended.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Swifts are an iconic bird. Each year, they move from their nesting boxes in Britain around the world, some staying in the air for 10 months non-stop. Then, in the summer, they return back, finding their old nesting grounds and raise their young. Sometimes, when they get home, their nesting boxes have disappeared. Swifts are site loyal, and if they return to their nest box, which is blocked or unavailable, they will refuse to nest. This has had a huge impact, not just on the birds themselves, but on the wider survival of the species. The loss of previous boxes and nesting spaces means that many swifts never nesting again until they die, resulting in a huge decline in fledgling numbers. For almost 30 years, swifts have been in constant decline, leading to the birds being placed on the Conservation Red List in 2001, up from amber. This demonstrates the level of risk they are under. They are not the only bird in this situation. 70 of Britain's 245 bird species are seriously at risk. But they're one of the most affected, given their loyalty to one particular home and their migration patterns. Their homes are disappearing because of choices we as humans make. Firstly, the way most modern buildings that are built completely exclude swift from the architecture. Very few gaps for the swifts to nestle in. Alongside this, older buildings where they previously had their homes are frequently repaired in a way that makes their former homes inaccessible. Repair work is frequently necessary, especially considering the needs to make homes and other buildings more energy efficient, but it comes at a cost to wildlife. Those two factors combined mean that year on year, the number of previous Swift homes in the fabric of buildings is declining, and they're not being replaced like for like. This motion seeks to mitigate that this as part of its aims, asking the council to commit to adding Swift bricks to the new buildings, put Swift bricks and boxes onto older buildings such as council-owned flat blocks when doing renovation work, and working with other organisations to facilitate what happens on non-council-owned buildings. This is a simple act that will not take much time in terms of money, but will have a huge impact for the Swifts. It works elsewhere. Councils such as Brighton and Exeter integrate Swift bricks into the development through planning conditions and through adding them to their own buildings, with positive feedback from residents and conservation groups. In our city, groups such as the Norwich Network and Wild King Street have set up schemes to install Swift boxes on buildings, showing what's possible on a tiny budget. And we have a huge amount of council-owned properties, which we are rightly proud of. Therefore, we can make a huge impact ourselves on bird habitat provision. With just a small amount of effort from us, we could massively increase the provision for Swift boxes across our city, working with those community groups and on our own estates. It's really as simple as we suggest. Making changes to the planning policy is again a simple change that would make a huge impact. Currently, it is difficult for the planning committee to ensure Swift boxes or bricks are built into new buildings, as there is no guidance to hook it onto, and officers do not recommend we act against guidance on the committee. In Bristol, this is done through supplementary planning guidance, which allows for them to give more weight to these important biodiversity issues. When we adopted our development plans, no supplementary planning guidance was drawn up. We could do this easily, strengthening the powers of our planning committee to protect wildlife and increase biodiversity, all at the negligible cost to the developers. By running an awareness campaign in the Citizens magazine, we can show residents where we're up to, showcasing how forward-thinking and environmentally minded the council is. We can highlight things like the Swift map tool to enable people to plot where they spotted Swifts, aiding conservation efforts to show people how easy it is to take easy steps to help Swifts at home, such as adding a Swift box to their own property. Many residents in my ward will be willing to do this, but more awareness as to how they can do this is needed. Elsewhere, it has been recommended that Swift boxes are added at a rate of 1 per dwelling. Making strides towards this will go a long way in protecting these beautiful birds, providing safe places for them to go and return to year on year, able to raise their young in a safe, council-provided homes. Swift population have fallen by 50% in the last 25 years. We've not got much time left to save them. Lots of motions we pass here in this council chamber have little in terms of practical things Norwich City Council can do. And we are more focused on lobbying people to do things. But in this case, things are within our control. We can vote tonight to make positive changes for wildlife, and to tackle our ecological emergency in a small but significant way. I'm looking forward to seeing more of these birds thanks to the efforts we make in this motion, a real, visible, tangible council success. I'd ask you to please support this motion and save these birds.
Thank you. Called by Councillor Fox, second the item.
So for those of you that aren't keen birders like myself, I just wanted to, if I can, play you a little bit of Swift Call so that next time you hear it in the skies above Norwich, you too will look up and you'll be excited by these birds. So they can't speak for themselves, but they do have a voice. And as my colleague said, after a long time on the wing, they come back to their nest and their nest loyal, and In my experiences working for the RSPCA Wildlife Department, I've seen many birds that have had broken wings after they've bashed and bashed and bashed against a closed nest site trying to get in. It's not a pretty thing to see. And these birds are so cool, I can't tell you. A bird that was ringed in Cambridge took 2 days to get from Morocco back to Cambridge. They are super cool. And in terms of what they mean for me, I have grown up in Norfolk. I was born in this city. I have lived here all of my life. And the the swifts coming back in the summer, seeing those wings glint and then hearing that call, that tells me that the world is still a little bit okay. The year they don't come back, the world is definitely not okay. And we've got something that's so simple to do and it's cheap. Swift bricks are not expensive. And we failed them in this area because in the Netherlands, between 1995 to 2020, they only lost 1% of their swift population. In the UK, in that same time, we lost 60%. We've got a disgraceful record on this and it's about time to turn it around. Now, in terms of public support, with some of the stuff that I've done in the King Street area, I gave a talk about swifts in our churchyard garden, so I should really reveal an interest here because my interest definitely is in protecting these birds. And the people in that neighbourhood got so excited about these birds. And I've had so many calls from people saying, how do we get these boxes put up? Will the council support us? If we can't afford these boxes, and if we can't afford to get them put up, will the council do this for us? And I don't currently have an answer for them. People want this as standard. When you speak to people, they see it as low-hanging fruit. They can't see why on earth this is not already a legal requirement everywhere. And also, they can't see why it's not being done in our city if we've got a forward-thinking, environmentally concerned council. And we've got to be carried away there.
Councillor Fox, I feel a real heel having to cut you off now, but unfortunately you've gone past your 3 minutes. So.
No worries, thank you, Lord Mayor.
So, I now call upon Councillor Giles to move the amendment, please.
Thank you for bringing the motion and supporting our amendments to resolutions 1 and 6. The Labour Group is proposing the amendment to resolution 3 as set out in the supplementary paper. In accordance with the Biodiversity Strategy and Development Plan, we procured Biodiversity Baseline and Opportunity Study, which is now in its latter stages of production. This baseline and opportunity study will form a strong evidence base for the production of a supplementary planning document, as mentioned, on biodiversity net gain. This will enable us to ascertain the habitats and species most threatened in Norwich, and they may well include swifts, and how we can utilise our increased planning policy powers to bind developers to conserve and enhance them most effectively. If we were to amend our development management policies, however, to require an obligation on all developers to install swift bricks, swift boxes, without compelling evidence base, the planning inspectorate will determine the policy unsound and without legal effect. Taking an evidence-based approach to ensure that our SPD, supplementary planning document, aligns with Norfolk-wide nature recovery strategies with targets for species recovery measurable according to a comprehensive baseline evidence base. Taking an evidence-based approach also enables us to ensure our powers and resources are joined up in the creation of an interconnected nature recovery network in Norwich, integral to achieving our biodiversity ambitions at a faster pace than the rest of Norfolk and the wider country. While acknowledging the good intentions of Resolution 3 as currently drafted, the Labour Group suggested amending it as such will avoid jumping the gun and enable us to most effectively achieve our aims under the biodiversity strategy to create a city where species can recover and thrive, halting species decline and increasing species diversity and including swifts by 2030.
Call upon Councillor Stoddart to second the amendment.
Formally second, Lord Mayor, reserve the right to speak.
Any other members wish to speak on this item? Councillor Champion.
Thank you. So, so the amendment put forward by the Labour Group waters down this motion, and I'm not willing to accept that. In this meeting today, we've already heard from Councillor Giles saying about how it's no point having a vague motion. We need strong leadership, strong environmental leadership. As outlined earlier, our motion is designed to be simple, cheap and effective. Other councillors managed to enshrine Swift bricks in similar measures into their planning policies without needing to couch it in maybe or consider. This is not the wording of a council who truly understands the climate and ecological emergency we are experiencing. It is a wording of a council who doesn't want to be seen voting against something that is easy, popular and effective, but also doesn't want to commit. It frustrates me that this chamber, we spend so much time debating measures to help our environment, yet the planning committee, which I sit on, does not have the ability, based on our local plan, to enforce simple environmental measures. We could easily change that. And given our planning committee and the powers it needs to make an impact, we don't. The Labour Group won't, and I can't understand why. We were willing to ensure planning policy is decided in an evidence-based way. The evidence is already clear on the benefits of Swift bricks. We're aware of the need to work within the existing business and plans, but this is not complicated change to make it to working practices. We should look at our biodiversity strategy and the biodiversity baseline and opportunity studies, absolutely. But we must not use going over the facts repeatedly as an excuse to delay cheap, simple measures that work. The Swifts simply cannot wait for us to do that. Birds don't understand bureaucracy and complicated policy documents. They understand that their homes are missing and they cannot raise their young. A refusal to make simple changes shows a lack of leadership on our ecological emergency. And it is an emergency. It's one that extends far wider than Swift's rule. Hedgehog populations in decline by 50% since 2000, and other native species show similar dramatic falls in numbers. Norwich City Council will not fix everything single-handed, but we must show that we are able to make decisive action on things that fall within our control. We must be willing to be the leaders that wildlife, our world, need for us to be. I'm willing to be that leader, is the leader of the council.
Any other members wish to speak on the amendment? In which case, Councillor Giles, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Councillor Champion. By taking this approach, we will give the planning committee those legal powers that it doesn't currently have under a supplementary planning document, powers with the legally recognised evidence base in order to take the types of measures that you want to see. If we were to jump the gun in this process and do as you suggest, the conditions we attach to planning applications will only be reversed on appeal by the planning inspectorate. So we wouldn't be doing Swifts or any other species any favours by passing the resolution as amended.
And that moves to the vote on the amendment. All those in favour, please indicate. Those against? Abstentions? The amendment is carried. So now I'd like to invite group spokespeople. Councillor Giles, would you like to respond on behalf of the Labour Group, please?
Thank you to those colleagues who supported the proposed amendment to Resolution 3. The Labour Group will now support this resolution along with the amended Resolutions 1 and 6 and the unamended Resolution 5. I'm afraid, however, we will be opposing Resolutions 2 and 4. The Labour Group recognised the significant threat to Swift populations. In recognition of this threat, 200 Swift boxes were purchased using the Environmental Strategy Team's Small Projects Fund during the spring and have been installed. Resolutions 2 and 4 carry huge funding commitments at a level necessary to consider as part of the budget setting process. If the Green Group wish to implement these measures, they will need to identify what savings they wish to make elsewhere in order to free up this amount of resource. Firstly, in terms of Resolution 2, the cost of installing a Swiftbox to every council property, while for individual properties is small, has been modelled across the city at roughly £870,000 in purchasing and labour costs. Implementation would result in some different choices. Taking a look through our HRA business plan, £870,000 additional expenditure would, excluding labour capacity costs, amount to wiping out nearly 90% of our annual domestic boiler upgrade replacement programme. In a cost of living crisis, with energy bills surging, this Labour administration does not believe a major regression in our commitment to keep our tenants warm and well is a fair course of conduct. In terms of Resolution 4, given the costs as outlined for installing the Swift boxes to all of our own tenants' properties, it is clearly evident that a large-scale installation programme on private properties as well would run into the tens of millions. Such investment would need to come from the General Fund. We all know we had to make difficult decisions to close a £6.2 million gap in the General Fund budget for this financial year alone. And sadly, some very difficult decisions remain for the years ahead to meet our significant medium-term financial challenges. The Green Group referenced installation costs from private properties forming part of the Love Norwich scheme. However, the Love Norwich scheme is a £371,000 ring-fenced UK Shared Prosperity Fund pot of money to be spent by May 2025. This money is sadly ring-fenced for the specific purpose of enhancing our grounds maintenance and neighbourhood cleanliness, as set out in our UK SPF investment plan, as agreed last summer, and cannot be diverted for other purposes. We have to issue reports to the government outlining how our expenditure has met certain outcomes and criteria as agreed. Moreover, as previously set out in my amendment speech, we are in the process of conducting a biodiversity baseline study, which will inform how we can spend the resources we do have most effectively. Given the quantities of money involved, there is no guarantee that installing a Swift box to every property in Norwich would be an effective and efficient investment. Swifts will only utilise them for nesting if the location is suitable. Academic surveys suggest Swift boxes should ideally be in the shadow of a large building on a north-facing wall to reduce potential overheating from excessive sun exposure or heavy rain. B, have a clear 15-metre flyway in front of the entrance from the nearest major construction. And C, avoid siting near vegetation such as creepers, bushes and hedgerows to avoid squirrels and rats reaching nests and house sparrows dominating them. Therefore, while we will vote in favour of Resolutions 1, 3, 5 and 6, the Labour Group, I'm afraid, will oppose Resolutions 2 and 4 as unaffordable in the circumstances and not yet grounded in the strong evidence base needed given the scale and quantity of what is being proposed.
Councillor Ackwood, would you like to respond on behalf of the Lib Dems?
Thank you. The statistics presented in the motion clearly illustrate the urgent need for action to protect the Swift population. Their recent addition to the red list on the UK Conservation Status report is scary, to say the least, and it is evident that Swifts are facing a critical threat to their survival. We really can't afford to stand idly by and watch their numbers dwindle further. The lack of nests cavities is a problem, caused, as we've heard, often by sealing up of roofs and other cavities on buildings, thus preventing birds returning to the same site each year. I'm told by an expert on solidity this morning that to attract Swifts to a new site, ideally you need to put up nest boxes and then play recordings of screaming Swifts throughout the breeding season. Sympathetic neighbours help a lot, apparently. So I was very interested to get your recording and to actually say that last week I was in Cardiff Bay, well not literally in the bay, but there on a plinth there was a playback system, which I thought was very interesting, and I was going to suggest that it's the sort of thing that we could be putting in parks here, but I think Councillor Giles will tell me that I'm living in cloud cuckoo land, that the money is not going to be forthcoming from Norwich City Council. But I'm also told by the same expert that a big part of the screening strips we see in late summer are young, non-breeding birds looking out for suitable nesting areas. And by playing these recordings, these young birds will come and scout out areas and then hopefully come back and breed in future years. But it can take 2 to 3 years to get a new colony established. So local projects such as Wild King Street and the Norwich Street Network have taken the initiative in creating suitable habitats for swifts. And I would want to see Norwich City Council also take a leading role in this endeavour by using its ownership of residential and commercial properties to support the installation of swift homes. But of course this is, as I understand, money permitting. But this motion does outline a number of practical and achievable steps working through Lion Homes and NCSL and other schemes and organisations such as the Norwich Historic Churches Trust. I do believe, and I understand what's been said by the Labour Group about the findings of the biodiversity baseline and so on and so forth, but I do believe that updating planning policies to include a requirement for sealed bricks where appropriate, because I take on board, you wouldn't put them in some places, you've got to allow swifts to fly in. But it would not only benefit swifts, but also contribute to enhancing wildlife habitats across the city. And this change would promote a sustainable and ecologically conscious approach to urban development. Raising awareness is essential to the success of any conservation initiative. And the use of Citizen magazine and the Council's social media accounts to inform residents and show us how we can take action is a straightforward step, and people may be prepared, obviously, to buy and invest in their own swift boxes and bricks. We wholeheartedly support the motion, and we urge the Council to prioritise swift conservation. And by working together and taking proactive steps to protect swift populations, we can ensure a sustainable future where these incredible birds continue to grace our skies and enrich our natural environment. Thank you.
So I've had Councillors Price and Gowan. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll be quick. Yes, welcome that the Labour Group are in general supporting the motion. I've never heard it said in such a way that sounded so unsupportive, just to say. But I hear what Councillor Giles is saying about the costs involved, and I think it's important to consider that if there is a will, there is a way. And so the reality is you need to build that into the medium-term financial strategy. You need to look at your building repairs and the outstanding amounts that you have each year, and you can use that maintenance grant to put swift boxes in when you're performing repairs. So there is a way you can commit to spending some money on this in the long term. You can't just rub your hands on it and then put it onto the private sector. I don't think that really sends a message that we really will support the swift community. At the end of the day, if you didn't just pour all the civil money into massive, large infrastructure projects with the Conservatives, then you would have that money to spend locally, and you could do that. So maybe look at how you use still in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Gowan, please.
Yes, I just wanted to correct perhaps or perhaps point to a misleading point there. If you look at point 2, it does specifically say when roof repairs and similar outline works are carried out. It's very important, this, because I've seen this before from that side, and I think I want to warn you about it. I will remember sitting in this chamber and having the same sort of argument trotted out against solar panels on council houses, and really some very unpleasant points made to councillors here that it would cost too much, it would be impossible, the same kind of tactics used. Just check yourself when you do that. It's really important that you get your facts right, because you can be very misleading, and that's actually cost a lot of people a lot of money and a lot of carbon. And also I'd like to say, In 2019, it was a Green proposed biodiversity emergency motion, which passed, and you passed it, and that's good. But we waited for a decade for the biodiversity action plan.
Councillor Stannard.
So, just to pick up on what Ben said. So, we often see motions like this coming through the year which have got significant funding implications. And we often say to you, well, what will we not spend on so that we can spend on what you're proposing? Of course, the simple answer to that is an amendment to the Budget Council, which you can do every year, or an alternative budget to our budget. But if you do that, then you could actually make sure that the resources are there, or attempt to make sure the resources are there in advance of bringing such motions. That's the way the council works, and that's the way to do it. So please, in future, that would prevent us having these ongoing, over and over again discussions about motions which come up mid-year, which have significant financial implications. It's not an excuse, Ben. You're the audit committee. Chair of the audit committee, you should know how the finances of the council work. It's not an excuse. If you're proposing something, you've got to propose where the money is. You stay on the budget every year. Actually, you could be putting amendments.
Could we have one councillor speaking at a time, please?
You could be making amendments, and you don't. And so, I mean, I'm not making excuses. I'm telling you that's how the council works, and that's what you need to do. Those are the levers you need to pull if you want to make proposals like this mid-year.
Any other members wish to speak at this point? No, in which case I'd like to call on Councillor Champion to respond.
Well, broadly speaking, thank you for supporting this motion. I do feel that the motion has been misconstrued in the sense that the expenses which are being attributed to it, I don't think are as extensive as being implied. And I would be very keen, I'd be very interested, if possible maybe, to look at some of the workings that you have identified to find the figures that you have now presented in this meeting. I would highlight that one of the reasons I brought this to the council is that 2 years ago there was a petition, 1,700 people signed that petition in Norwich, asking for it to become a council policy. It was sent to Councillor Huntley, who said about the supplementary planning document, and from my perspective, what I see is bureaucratic feet dragging, and I see the environment suffering, and I see the ecological crisis magnifying, and all the conversation, and I see the amendments, and I just don't understand why you can't see the urgency before us. And I would really encourage you, next time you wish to amend something, maybe have a conversation so that you fully understand what you're amending before you all follow the line of your party whip and vote as decreed.
Thank you. Before we move to the vote, can I just confirm, Councillor Giles, based on the comments you made in your reply, that you'd like to effect a split vote on this 1, 3, 5 and 6 and 2 and 4? Thank you. So we'll now move to the vote on resolutions 1, 3, 5 and 6. All those in favour, please indicate. So that is unanimous, thank you. We now, so that those have been carried, and we'll now move to vote on resolutions 2 and 4. All those in favour, please indicate. Those against? So that fails. So thank you, that's it for this evening.
Can you please be upstanding for the Lord Mayor?